Chapter 37. For him, Old Qian, you think too highly of that idiot. He has no talent, no ability, and he hasn't even developed his spiritual root. I'm not interested in him at all. The suspension is for me to concentrate on comprehending the power of space. He's just a tool for me to comprehend. Shu Qianyue said disdainfully. Is that so? Qian Shanghai asked with a smile. Old Qian, you don't have to be so eccentric. Believe it or not. Shu Qianyue said and walked out of the zero-gravity room. Qianyue, you haven't talked so much for a long time. It's abnormal. Qian Shanghai said with a thoughtful expression. Shu Qianyue didn't respond and went straight to the small door. Qianyue, if that guy can enter the top 20 freshmen in the final exam, I'll give you the thing you want. Qian Shanghai said unhurriedly. Shu Qianyue stopped and slowly turned around. Old Qian, are you serious? Qian Shanghai smiled but didn't say anything. He just nodded. Shu Qianyue asked strangely, You think that guy's good? Qian Shanghai was still smiling without saying anything. He nodded again. Blue veins appeared on Shu Qianyue's forehead. Don't keep me in suspense. Tell me. Qian Shanghai's turbid eyes flashed, and he stopped smiling. Qianyue, your clothes are torn. Puff. An arrow of blood spurted out from the old man's nose. Shu Qianyue lowered her head to take a look. She didn't know when, but a large hole had been torn at the waist of her robe. Her snow-white skin was brazenly exposed. She didn't even notice it. Was it done by that guy? Shu Qianyue showed an incredulous expression. Qian Shanghai took out a handkerchief and wiped his nose. His old hand trembled, and he muttered to himself, Not bad, really not bad. Hearing Qian Shanghai praise her exposed skin, Shu Qianyue's delicate and beautiful face burned with anger. This old man was getting more and more outrageous. He even dared to speak rudely to her and blatantly flirt with her. Qian Shanghai, you shameless old man. You're courting death. After saying that, Shu Qianyue took out a flying sword. His whole body's spirit aura burst out with a loud rumble. He was about to attack Qian Shanghai. Qian Shanghai shouted, Wait, I said that kid is not bad. Shu Qianyue's cold face finally softens. She puts away her flying sword and turns around to leave. Qian Shanghai chuckled. Not bad. Bang! A flying hammer flew across the sky and smashed into Qian Shanghai's old face. Blood flowed from his nose, and the old man's body trembled slightly. He fell to the ground with a thud and muttered in a low voice, Call an ambulance. Shu Qianyue had already left. Today's special training ended early. Li Daochong did not go to the library. Was he going to buy a second-hand array from the second-hand market? Master, no matter how much theory he studied, it was useless without practice. Li Daochong felt that he should be able to make a grade 1 rune card, so he decided to buy some materials and go back to try it out. Time was very precious for Li Daochong. There was still more than 2 months before the final exam. He must get a good result. In the first semester of freshman year, Li Daochong's grades had been very stable and ranked last among all the students. If he did not do well in the final exam of this semester, Li Daochong would face the situation of repeating a grade or being expelled. Li Daochong originally did not attach much importance to the final exam. He did not even care whether he would still stay in Xiansong University after the end of this semester. He just wanted to be a fool, keep a low profile, and grow stronger quickly. He wanted to be able to protect himself and Yinping while fulfilling his dream step by step. When he had a certain strength, he would investigate Li Tianyang's matter. However, plans were not as good as changes. His father's situation had taken a turn for the better. Although he had been cleared of any wrongdoing, he had been seriously injured. Although the family had regained their status and name, they had actually marginalized and ignored Li Tianyang. After all, a cripple was dispensable to the family. The family's indifference made Li Daochong's heart cold. His father's former enemies came looking for him. If it was not for his father's bravery and fearlessness, that old man called Qiu Xiong would have done something. The rest of the people who had a grudge with Li Tianyang would probably appear one by one in the future. Right now, they were just in the observation stage. Those people were definitely not people that Li Daochong could deal with right now. Li Daochong knew that it was impossible to raise his strength to the same level as Li Tianyang in a short period of time. Even if he had the hot-blooded upgrader, it was impossible to raise his strength that fast. Moreover, whether it was cultivation or strength, even if it could be raised quickly, it could not be rushed. These days, Li Daocheng already felt that he was rising a little too fast. His foundation was obviously not stable. Li Daocheng felt that he was like a balloon that was being blown up quickly. His skin had already been stretched to the limit and could explode at any time. The hot-blooded upgrader only cared about constantly inflating the container. As for whether the container could bear it or not, it did not care at all. When Li Daocheng had just reached the 8th level of qi refining a few days ago, his body had a very obvious feeling of swelling. It was very uncomfortable. His physical strength was too weak and could not bear the explosive increase of spiritual energy in his body. However, after the high-intensity training in the weightless room, Li Daocheng's feeling of swelling had decreased a lot. Every day, he would fall down thousands of times, just like forging iron, tempering Li Daocheng's body again and again. After the training, Chu Qianyue was not stingy. She would let the injured Li Daocheng soak in the strengthened healing liquid so that Li Daocheng's body could be healed in time. Otherwise, if he only tempered without healing, his body would only be left with hidden injuries, and in the end, he would become disabled. Now that the situation had changed, Li Daocheng had no choice but to replan his development path. In the past, he relied on his family and his father's powerful personal strength. Now, all of that had become a thing of the past. Without background and strength, those guys who had made enemies with his father in the past, even if they didn't kill you, they would definitely not feel good if they casually stepped on you a few times. In the short term, the fastest and most effective way to prevent the outside world from causing trouble for him and his father was to find a powerful backer. With a backer, those who wanted to cause trouble would naturally disappear, saving a lot of unnecessary disputes. The only backer Li Daocheng could think of was Xiansong University, the #1 cultivation university in Blue Bay Star, to take him seriously. The end-of-term exam was the best way to get the school to take him seriously. As long as he showed enough potential, Xiansong University would naturally take him seriously. If he could enter the elite class, or even the super class, then his status would be very different. It was still the same saying, talent was lacking everywhere. What the Shanghua Federation valued the most was talent, and the major universities were even more so. The threat of the Hades had never weakened. Every additional cultivator in the Federation's territory increased their capital and strength in the fight against the Hades by a bit, and the safety of the rear area would be guaranteed by a bit. Any cultivator was a precious asset to the Federation, and the major universities cherished talent as much as their own lives. They did their best to recruit good students and focus on nurturing students with potential. Therefore, the end-of-term exam this time was extremely important to Li Daocheng. If he flunked it, the fate of himself, his father, and Silver Bottle would become unknown. It was very likely that they would sink into the abyss and never be able to turn things around. His father had had too many grudges with people in the past, and he himself had gotten into a lot of trouble because of Qiao Shima. Although that girl Silver Bottle didn't have much contact with the outside world, she just so happened to be growing more and more beautiful. The people who had been looking for trouble with him recently had all targeted her, wanting to take Silver Bottle for themselves. Card slaves didn't have human rights in the Federation's cultivation law. Whether they were raped or killed, they would only be punished for embezzlement or destruction of other people's property. This was a damned law. As long as the owner of the card slave didn't have enough strength, it meant that the card slave around them would have no protection at all. Li Daocheng still wanted to wait for Silver Bottle to become an adult before giving her back her freedom. Then, he would find a good man for her to marry and live a normal life. This girl had been sold at the age of 6 and suffered a lot with him. He had to give her an explanation, or else Li Daocheng wouldn't be at ease. In order to achieve this goal, he had to wait for Silver Bottle to become an adult. If he didn't have strength or background, Li Daocheng knew that it was absolutely impossible to wait for Silver Bottle to become an adult so that she could get married. Li Daocheng couldn't even deal with Zhang Honglai. Even if Li Daocheng's cultivation had surpassed Zhang Honglie's, he still couldn't touch him. Zhang Honglai had a family and connections behind him. The Zhang family had several elders in the Qi gathering stage and a foundation establishment stage ancestor. Li Daocheng wasn't afraid that Zhang Honglai would only deal with him. He was only afraid that he would deal with Silver Bottle. He couldn't always follow that girl 24/7. Moreover, even if Li Daocheng followed him, if he was a Qi gathering stage expert, he would just be a piece of cake. Xiansong University didn't allow private fights, but outside the university, it wasn't the same thing. If they really wanted to take your life, there were many ways. Especially for cultivator families with medium strength and above. Killing the current Li Daocheng would be as easy as crushing an ant. On the other hand, if Li Daocheng did well in the end-of-term exam and got the attention of the university, he would soar to the sky and become the focus of training. Once he had an identity, everything would be different. Backed by Xiansong University, one of the Federation's Project 199, anyone who wanted to cause trouble would have to consider whether they had the strength to do so. As the saying goes, one can enjoy the shade of a big tree. As for killing someone, that was even more impossible. If something really happened to Xiansong University's focus of training, not only would Xiansong University investigate to the end, even the Federation's Cultivation Security Bureau's Special Forces would also be involved in the investigation. The talents of the university were the pillars of the Federation. Daring to touch a pillar was like playing with fire. Therefore, the importance of the end-of-term exam to the current Li Daocheng could be imagined. It could be said that it was the only chance for Li Daocheng to reverse the situation. If he wanted to be truly valued by the university, it was basically useless if he didn't enter the top 20. Xiansong University's cultivation school had a total of over 5,000 freshmen. They were the most outstanding youths of Blue Bay Star. They were the best of the best, 1 in 1,000 people who had passed the college entrance exam. Entering the top 20 was easier said than done. There were over 100 people in the elite class and 15 in the super class. Each of these geniuses was more abnormal than the other. Even though Li Daocheng was already at the 8th level of Qi refining, he didn't have a solid foundation and hadn't practiced any powerful techniques. He had only relied on his cultivation base and the 2 techniques he had brought with him, the basic technique and the telekinesis battle technique. Li Daocheng estimated that he might not even be able to beat a 5th level Qi refining student in the elite class, let alone top students like Zhang Honglai and Hongwu. There were still over 2 months before the end of term exam. Li Daocheng didn't plan on increasing his spiritual energy anymore. The 8th level of Qi refining was enough. Next, he had to build a solid foundation step by step and temper his body. Only by strengthening his body could his body contain more spiritual energy. He wanted to practice another technique, preferably one that could reach the mid-grade human level. As for the beginner technique, Li Daocheng didn't plan on looking for another one. The basic technique he had brought with him was enough. Li Daocheng had checked the price of a mid-grade human-level technique. The cheapest one would cost at least 200,000 Federation coins. If he wanted to buy it, he would have to make a talisman card or spirit card as soon as possible. Li Daocheng thought as he walked out of the school gate. Chapter 38. Li Daocheng was busy thinking about the editing of a spirit sequence and didn't see Zhang Honglai walking towards him. The scene from last time replayed itself. Li Daocheng walked forward with his head lowered. He was only immersed in his own world as he coded. In the eyes of others, he looked like a coward. Zhang Honglai stopped in his tracks. The group of Green Wolf Society students behind him also stopped. Zhang Honglai looked at Li Daocheng walking towards him and sneered. He was just looking for this kid. A week had passed, and he hadn't heard any news about Li Daocheng and Xiao Shima canceling their engagement. This made him very angry. Zhang Honglai had already lost his patience with this fool and wanted to get rid of him quickly. Zhang Honglai was shocked by Li Tianyang's return. He thought that he wouldn't be able to make a move on Li Daocheng. However, Zhang Honglai soon found out that Li Tianyang had become a cripple and was completely marginalized. He was demoted to a servant in the family, which was no different from being kicked out of the family. Someone in the Li family even spread the news that Li Tianyang's life and death had nothing to do with the family. Young Master Jean, isn't that Li Daochong? A sharp-eyed youth in blue clothes beside Zhang Honglai asked. The others looked over and saw Li Daochong walking towards them with his head lowered. Peng Zi is still lying in the hospital. Who wants to avenge him? Zhang Honglai asked in a low voice. Hee, don't fight with me. Young Master Jean, I'll go. I've always been good at cleaning up trash. Chun Ming rubbed his hands and volunteered. Chun Ming, who looked fierce and was in the 4th stage of qi refinement, was famous among the freshmen. During last semester's exam, he was ranked around the last 100 in the elite class. His ranking wasn't worth mentioning. However, Chun Ming had seriously injured more than 10 people during the martial arts test. All the students who had encountered him had their arms and legs broken. The most serious one had not a single bone in his body that was intact. Chun Ming was the one with the most resounding reputation in the elite class. His ruthlessness could be seen from this. Many seniors knew that there was a broken bone, ghostly hands, Chun Ming among the freshmen. In the school, other than the top students of the elite class and the geniuses of the superclass, the other students would hide far away when they saw Chun Ming. They didn't even dare to look at him, fearing that Chun Ming would target them and break their bones. Even if some of the students had a certain level of strength, they might not be afraid of Chun Ming in a one-on-one fight. However, they were terrified of the Green Wolf Society behind Chun Ming. The vice captain, Zhang Honglai, was ranked 2nd in the elite class. He was at the peak of the 6th level of the qi refining stage. Before the end of term exam, he would definitely reach the 7th level of the qi refining stage. The students couldn't afford to offend Chun Ming, who was a bully in the school, so they could only hide. On the west side of Xiansong University's gate was a green avenue. Most of the passers-by were students. Because this was the only way to get to the main city, there were a lot of students on the road. Chun Ming rubbed his hands and walked towards Li Daochong. His eyes were fixed on Li Daochong, who was walking towards him with his head lowered. It was as if he was looking at a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Chun Ming's face was filled with excitement. He could finally hear the heart-wrenching sound of broken bones. He couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't wait for the street to shrink so that he could appear in front of Li Daochong, grab his weak little arm, and gently break it. Kacha! That sound was like praising my lord. Hallelujah! Chun Ming's face was filled with a crazy expression. The students who saw Chun Ming on the road all had a frightened expression and hid far away. Why are you pulling me? A student who wasn't paying attention was pulled by his friend and almost fell down. Hide a little. Can't you see that Chun Ming is coming? His friend whispered. Chun Ming, so scary. That student was so frightened that he immediately shouted. His friend covered his mouth. 2 students who were so scared that they peed their pants stood in the corner, trembling. They prayed that Chun Ming didn't see them. There were many students on the road, and they were a hindrance. Chun Ming impatiently said, "Scram to the side. If anyone dares to block the road, I will break their arm." Immediately, a path was opened up on the road. A few students were wearing headphones. It was unknown whether they were listening to music or studying. In any case, they didn't hear Chun Ming's warning. Chun Ming grabbed the student in front and threw him out. That student didn't know what happened, and his face hit the wall. He was about to explode when he saw that it was Chun Ming. He covered his nose and silently ran away. Li Daochong's mind was filled with questions about the spirit sequence. He was in a state of selflessness and didn't know what was happening around him. Chun Ming looked at Li Daochong, who was getting closer and closer to him. He mustered all his strength and walked over, wanting to collide with Li Daochong. Chun Ming estimated that this collision was enough to send Li Daochong flying 4 to 5 meters away. It wouldn't be a problem for him to break a few bones. Seeing Chun Ming walk straight to Li Daochong, who was looking at the ground with his head lowered, the students on the road showed sympathetic expressions. Bang! The 2 of them collided. Kacha! The sound of bones breaking. When they heard the sound, many students frowned. Just the sound alone was enough to make their hair stand on end. Their bodies trembled, and they felt that something was wrong with certain parts of their bodies. All the students who saw this thought that Li Daochong's bones must have been broken. But the strange thing was that after Chun Ming collided with Li Daochong, Chun Ming sat on the ground. Li Daochong didn't seem to be affected at all. He looked as if he didn't touch anything and even took 2 more steps forward. For a moment, the surroundings were silent. The students who were passing by stared at this scene with wide eyes. Shock spread across everyone's faces. This collision pulled Li Daochong back to reality from his deep thoughts. With a strange expression, he looked down and saw a sturdy student sitting on the ground in front of him. Li Daochong finally realized that he had bumped into someone. His face immediately showed an apologetic expression. For the past few days, he had been falling in the weightless room with 5 times the gravity. Xu Qianyue called it training his spatial perception. Li Daochong had always been skeptical about this. How was this training his spatial perception? It was clearly training his resistance. That woman didn't even allow Li Daochong to wear his Dharma robe. Every time he fell, it was like hitting a rock with his flesh. Unknowingly, Li Daochong's resistance had improved by leaps and bounds. Even he didn't realize it. "Student, are you okay?" "I'm sorry, I was thinking about the problem and didn't pay attention to the road." "I'm sorry." Li Daochong quickly reached out to help Chun Ming, who was sitting on the ground. Chun Ming looked at Li Daochong with a shocked expression. His forehead was covered in cold sweat. He had used all his strength to send Li Daochong flying. Who would have thought that he would feel like he had hit a stone wall? 4 of his ribs were broken, and one of them was even stuck in his lung. It was so painful that he wanted to scream. F***ck your lungs. But with so many people watching, if he really screamed, he wouldn't be able to stay in Profound Firmament University in the future. It must be that he didn't hit the right place. His weak ribs hit a hard bone, and he hurt himself instead. Chun Ming thought so. Seeing Li Daochong reach out his hand, a cold light flashed in Chun Ming's eyes. "See if I don't crush your bones." Chun Ming grabbed Li Daochong's hand and used all his strength to crush it. He gritted his teeth. Chun Ming exerted force and said with a fierce look, Kacha. The surrounding students once again heard the heart-wrenching sound of bones breaking. Chun Ming wanted to say, "You F***king dare to hit me. Are you courting death? Kneel down and kowtow 3 times, call me father, and I won't be calculated with you." But just as he spat out these 2 words, Chun Ming's hand was in intense pain. His hand, which was filled with all his strength, felt like he was holding onto a piece of silver. His 5-finger bones and palm bones were all broken. Pudong. Chun Ming's hand, which was holding onto Li Daochong, was in excruciating pain. His legs went soft, and he knelt on the ground. All the students who saw this scene opened their mouths wide and looked at Li Daochong in disbelief. Why would Chun Ming kneel to this fool? Li Daochong was also stunned. He didn't understand and asked, "Student, why are you doing this? Please get up. Is there something you need my help with?" Li Daochong looked at Chun Ming carefully as he spoke. He wanted to search for information about this person in his memory, but there was nothing. He didn't know this person at all. Chun Ming's body trembled. His eyes were filled with fear. He thought that he had hit the wrong place and injured himself. Now, even if he was an idiot, he couldn't find a reason to explain why he had used all his strength to pinch Li Daochong's hand. The hardness of that hand was far beyond Chun Ming's imagination. Fear spread in the depths of Chun Ming's heart. Li Daochong didn't know what was going on. He still held onto Chun Ming's hand and tried to pull him up from the ground. "Oh, whoa." Chun Ming let out a sharp howl. "Student, what's wrong with you?" Li Daochong saw the other party's painful expression. He thought that Chun Ming had hit his knee while kneeling on the ground, so he increased the strength of his hand. "Kacha!" Another soft and crisp sound rang out. Chun Ming's right arm drooped and couldn't be lifted. It was dislocated. "Student, you're sweating a lot. Are you sick?" Li Daochong looked concerned as he took a step forward. Chun Ming jumped back. "Don't come over." Li Daochong stared blankly at the strange student in front of him. "Okay, I won't come over. If you need my help, just let me know. You don't have to kneel." Chun Ming looked at Li Daochong as if he was looking at a wild beast. 3 words kept popping out in his mind. So scary, so scary. How could this guy's body be so hard? Chun Ming didn't have his usual fierce demeanor. "It's nothing. I've been suffering from food poisoning recently. My legs are weak and weak." Chun Ming randomly found an excuse. Oh, I misunderstood. Goodbye. Li Daochong scratched his head, feeling a little embarrassed. He bid farewell and continued on his way. Chun Ming stared blankly at Li Daochong as he slowly walked away. In the distance, Zhang Honglai kept signaling Chun Ming to beat up Li Daochong with his eyes. The latter pretended not to see. What a joke. This guy's body was even harder than a wild beast. He wasn't human at all. Chun Ming didn't dare to hit him again. Li Daochong took 2 steps forward and saw Zhang Honglai standing in front of him. His eyes immediately turned cold. Zhang Honglai didn't know why Chun Ming didn't hit Li Daochong. He even kneeled in front of everyone. Could it be that Li Daochong bribed him? Zhang Honglai couldn't care less about Chun Ming. He blocked Li Daochong's path and said, "Trash, a week has passed. Did you think I was joking with you? It seems like you're looking for shit in the toilet with a lantern." Li Daochong stopped in his tracks and looked ahead. "Next month, Xiao Shima and I will be getting married. Remember to come to the wedding banquet." Zhang Honglia's body trembled. When he heard the word wedding, his eyes spat fire. Chapter 39. Zhang Honglia's harsh words in front of everyone caused the surrounding students to look at Li Daochong with pity. In their eyes, this frail and pitiful fellow had already been sentenced to death. Although many students didn't like Zhang Honglai bullying the weak, he did indeed have a strength to do so. His words weren't empty words. The Zhang family's strength in Tianyuan City was extraordinary. Although there was still a gap between them and the 4 great clans, they were still considered one of the top clans among the mid-tier clans. The family had a foundation establishment stage cultivator and a few chi gathering stage experts. Not only did they have a strong background, but Zhang Honglai was ranked 2nd in the elite class last semester, second only to the cultivation madman Hongwu. If Zhang Honglai was able to enter the top 3 in this semester's end-of-term exam, he would have a chance to enter the elite class and become the focus of the school's training. His future would be limitless. Li Daochong was now in nothing more than a drowning dog. Not only was he abandoned by his family, he didn't have the strength or the talent, and his brain wasn't very good either. Whether it was his background or his personal strength, Li Daochong was completely crushed. What could he use to fight against Zhang Honglai? Everyone firmly believed Zhang Honglia's words. Li Daochong's expression was indifferent as he took 2 steps forward to stand in front of Zhang Honglai. His height advantage allowed him to look down slightly at him. "You like Xiao Shima? If you have the guts, then go chase her yourself. What are you yelling at me for? The Federation is all about cultivation. I've already recorded what you just said. I can sue you for intimidation." Li Daochong raised his wristwatch to indicate that he had done so. The surrounding students were all stunned for a moment. They didn't think that Li Daochong wouldn't be afraid of Zhang Honglia's threats. But in their eyes, saying such words would only make his death more miserable. This was a provocation to Zhang Honglai. Zhang Honglia's expression changed. He did not recognize Li Daochong. How could such words come out of the mouth of a fool? Zhang Honglai was vexed in his heart. He had been blinded by anger and actually said such words in public. There were both witnesses and evidence. This kid was right. If he really wanted to sue, it would really work. But even if they really went to the local cultivation court to sue him, given the Zhang family's power, they probably wouldn't even be able to sue him over such a small matter. No matter how badly Daochong was, he was still a student of Profound Firmament University. Any student from a cultivation university would receive priority protection from the Federation. Students from a cultivation university under Project 199, like Xiansong University, had an even higher status. This kid actually knew how to judge the situation and use his identity as a student. This greatly surprised Zhang Honglai. Was the fool enlightened? If that was really the case, Zhang Honglai had no choice but to change his strategy for dealing with Li Daochong. Zhang Honglai really wanted to snatch the watch off Li Daochong's wrist, but there were so many students watching. If he really tried to snatch it and the Zhang family's enemies found out, it would be bad for both himself and the family. There was no hurry to deal with this trash. It was really inconvenient for him to do it himself. As long as he spent some money, he could find someone to take care of him. He could even take his life, but this kind of thing definitely couldn't be brought to the table. A little impatience spoiled great plans. Zhang Honglia's expression changed slightly. He put away his anger and laughed. You said you want to marry Qiao Shimo? What shameless boasting. Why haven't I heard that the Qiao family is going to fulfill the marriage contract? The entire Tianyuan city knows what kind of situation you are in now. Are you a toad lusting after a swan's meat? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? You're just a piece of trash without a spirit vein. Forget Qiao Shimo. Even the old aunties in the slums wouldn't fancy you. Ha ha. The group of followers behind Zhang Honglai roared with laughter. Li Daochong was too lazy to argue with Zhang Honglai. He only said, I don't need you to judge what kind of trash I am. No matter how bad I am, I'm still better than a fly. After saying that, Li Daochong walked around Zhang Honglai and left. Who are you calling a fly? Pa. Zhang Honglai reached out and patted Li Daochong's shoulder. Let go, Li Daochong said calmly. The spirit energy in his body was already rolling. If Zhang Honglai forced him, he would be embarrassed. Even if there was a possibility that he couldn't beat Zhang Honglai now, Li Daochong would make him pay the price. He was ready to use his telekinesis attack at any time. Zhang Honglai, what are you doing? Bullying other students again? A cold voice came from the side. Everyone's attention was on Zhang Honglai and Li Daochong, so they didn't pay attention to the situation around them. They only turned their heads when they heard the voice. Blizzard Bing walked over from the other side of the street with a frosty face. Her black robe tightly wrapped around her sexy and voluptuous body, deeply attracting the eyes of every male student who looked at her. However, no matter how attractive Blizzard Bing's body was, the male students only glanced at her and then looked away. No one dared to provoke this level 1 lecturer who was known for being strict and cruel. If they were not careful, they would be blacklisted by Blizzard Ice. Not only would their credits be deducted, they would also be beaten to the point where they could only cry under their blankets. Zhang Honglai frowned. It was this woman again. Why did she bump into him every time? This was already the third time. Last time, Blizzard Bing also bumped into the Green Wolf Society, teaching 2 blind guys a lesson behind the dormitory building. This woman not only called him to the office and scolded him, but also called his father Zhang Jintian over and scolded him. She said that his father didn't teach his son well. She also said that this was a school and not a gangster society. The school was in a mess because of the gangster-like society. The head of the Zhang family was taught a lesson by Blizzard Bing in front of several lecturers. She didn't give him any face at all. After Zhang Jintian went back, he flew into a rage and grounded Zhang Honglai for 3 days. If it was an ordinary lecturer, Zhang Honglai wouldn't even take them seriously. He didn't dare to be presumptuous in front of Blizzard Bing. This woman even dared to talk back to the dean when she was really angry. How could that be? Mr. Qin, we were just discussing the problem of cultivation. Zhang Honglai laughed. Really? Then why did you put your hand on that student's shoulder? Blizzard Bing frowned slightly. She didn't quite believe Zhang Honglia's words. Blizzard Bing hated school violence the most. As an excellent cultivation lecturer, she had the obligation to put an end to this kind of unhealthy practice. Zhang Honglai had good talent. In the elite class, apart from Hongwu, his talent could be said to be the highest. His future was bright, and it was only a matter of time before he became a cultivator. However, Blizzard Bing wouldn't play favoritism just because Zhang Honglai had good grades. A student without good character would only become a scourge, even if he had high achievements in the future. Hooligans weren't scary. What was scary was that hooligans could become cultivators. It's just a greeting. Mr. Qin, you don't have to be too nervous. I suddenly remembered that there's one more thing to complete in today's training plan. I'll go first. Zhang Honglia's hand inadvertently moved away from Li Daochong's shoulder. Blizzard Bing wasn't easy to deal with, so it was best to leave. Li Daochong, although you're terrible at cultivation, you're very clever at spiritual-based programming. Study hard, and you can still make progress on this path in the future. After you've mastered it, you can still work for the Federation to fight against the Hades and protect our homeland. You're different from Zhang Honglai. You have to work hard and don't mix around with him. It won't do you any good. Blizzard Bing's words of encouragement had a different meaning when they came out of her mouth. It felt like she was teaching someone a lesson. He was a little surprised that Blizzard Bing called out Li Daochong's name. He hadn't been going to class recently. The last time he fell asleep in class, he was caught red-handed by Blizzard Bing and answered a question. She actually still remembered him. Li Daocheng had been ostracized for a long time and was constantly ridiculed. Now that someone had suddenly encouraged him, even if the tone was harsh, it still warmed his heart. Li Daocheng nodded and said, "I understand, Mr. Qin. I'll work hard. I have to go buy some things, so I'll take my leave first." "Okay, go. Although Mr. Chu told me to help you apply for leave, I still hope that you can come to my class as much as possible. I've understood your situation. Pure cultivation isn't suitable for you. You can consider developing in the direction of a spirit sequencer. Even if your spiritual energy is weak, as long as you're willing to work hard, you can still become a very powerful spirit sequencer. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me." Blizzard Bing's serious face revealed a touch of admiration. "Okay, Mr. Qin. I'll work hard. Goodbye." Li Daocheng swept away his unhappiness from his encounter with Zhang Honglai and bade farewell to Blizzard Bing. Li Daocheng really didn't have the mood to compete with people like Zhang Honglai. Time was really precious to him. Li Daocheng didn't want to waste a single minute and second. Half an hour later, Li Daocheng arrived at the Spirit Brain secondhand market. He spent 1,000 Federation coins to buy a broken array. He then went home. When he reached home, Li Daocheng plunged into the house. A brand new array? It cost at least 30,000 Federation coins. The better ones cost more than 100,000. It was definitely a high-end product. Li Daocheng now owed Chu Qinyue a few 100,000 Federation coins. He had to be frugal with the money he had. He could only buy an obsolete product that had been out of production for decades, and it was even broken. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been sold to him at such a cheap price. The boss directly sold it to him as scrap. In fact, this thing couldn't be used at all. The reason Li Daocheng dared to buy it was not because he knew how to fix it. He didn't know how to fix this thing. Li Daocheng relied on the hot-blooded upgrader because when he came into contact with the array, the hot-blooded upgrader reacted and notified him that this was a broken array. Array in the instrument? Or damaged. Apart from absorbing underworld ghost energy and converting it into spirit chi, the hot-blooded upgrader also had an equipment material exchange function. Li Daocheng had never used this function before. The status bar hadn't been activated because he didn't have enough soul points. If he wanted to exchange for it, he had to accumulate 1,000 soul points. Otherwise, this function couldn't be used. At first, Li Daocheng didn't know how to obtain soul points. The most direct way to obtain soul points was when Li Daocheng killed the Stonehorn cow and obtained 10 soul points. At that time, Li Daocheng thought that he could only obtain soul points from killing living creatures. The points gained were also very small, so he didn't pay much attention to it. These days, Li Daocheng had been concentrating on researching the spirit brain. In the end, when he used spirit chi to decode the spirit sequence, the hot-blooded upgrader actually reacted and notified him of the spirit brain's characteristics and degree of damage. Only then did Li Daocheng notice that the black section at the bottom of the interface was activated. It showed that he had 3,325 soul points and could be exchanged. At first, Li Daocheng didn't understand why so many soul points had suddenly increased. Later on, he found out that the remnant soul he had destroyed while healing his father was the reason for the sudden increase in soul points. That night, Li Daocheng directly obtained 2,500 soul points. He had also accumulated 825 soul points before, because as long as he didn't reach 1,000 soul points, the status bar would be grayed out. Because the hot-blooded upgrader didn't give any hints about this function, Li Daocheng had forgotten about it. Last night, Li Daocheng had tried using 1,000 soul points to exchange for a piece of the spirit brain's hardware. He actually succeeded. Chapter 40. In Li Daocheng's opinion, the hot-blooded upgrade's material exchange function was even more powerful than the upgrade function. In other words, as long as he accumulated enough soul power, he could exchange for any material. However, in addition to the soul power requirement, he had to touch the item. As long as he touched the hot-blooded upgrade device, he could immediately analyze the item. The structure's principle could be determined almost instantly. After activating the 1,000 soul power points exchange column, there were still 2,000 soul power points exchange, 3,000 soul power points exchange, and so on, all the way to 100,000 soul power points exchange. There was a price. The item was blank. Li Daocheng used a few days to basically figure out how to exchange. The method was simple. First, he had to have 1,000 soul power points, and then he had to touch the item he wanted to exchange for. That's right, he had to touch it. It was equivalent to making a copy. However, it was a little stronger than a copy. As long as the item he touched was 50% intact, the hot-blooded upgrade device could give him a brand new one. Of course, the price of a complete item was extremely high. For example, the low-level spirit brain in Li Daocheng's hands wasn't worth much at all. It wasn't a rare item. However, if he wanted to use soul power points to exchange for it, the price would be 10,000 soul power points. It was simply a fraudulent exchange. However, if Li Daocheng only exchanged for the item's components, regardless of whether it was a core component or an insignificant component, it would only cost 1,000 soul power points. The spirit brain's core component, the talisman chip, and the rice grain-sized corner, the exchange price was the same. If he made good use of this, it would simply be a bug among bugs. It was precisely because he discovered this feature that Li Daocheng dared to buy a scrap array from the second-hand market. Device. When Li Daocheng touched it, the hot-blooded upgrade device gave a notification. This array? The device's integrity was 879%, only because the core component spirit processor was broken. After returning home, Li Daocheng immediately opened the hot-blooded upgrade device to exchange, and a brand new spirit processor appeared. It was actually optimized. Li Daocheng had recently read a lot of related books, and he knew the spirit brain and related devices like the back of his hand. The array spirit processor that he had exchanged was actually a bit stronger than the star explosion level array spirit processor that the heaven-flying immortal company had produced. On the market, the starburst grade array spirit processor was worth 300,000 Federation coins. Unless you were rich, you couldn't afford it. Of course, if you weren't a professional spirit sequencer, this thing wouldn't be of much use to you. Pleasantly surprised, Li Daocheng inserted this piece of array spirit processor into the old array. Within the ritual, there was a general array. The device was connected to the spiritual brain. Everything was ready. Li Daocheng held the spiritual base controller in his hand and began a program. His telekinesis connected with the spiritual brain, and he used the spiritual base controller to input spiritual energy and began a program. Spirit-based programming was to use psychokinesis to control spirit energy and edit the spirit sequence code through the spirit-based controller, allowing the spirit brain to know the programmer's intentions. The strength of one's psyche and the level of one's cultivation would not determine one's success as a spirit sequencer. The key was the accuracy of a spirit sequence code. The higher the accuracy, the more the spirit brain would be able to understand the programmer's intentions. The more precise the spirit sequence that was formed, the higher the grade of the talisman card and spirit card would be. After half a day, Li Daocheng created a protective talisman card, the Golden Bell talisman card. It took a bit longer, but it reached the 3rd level. However, this talisman card looked a bit ugly. It was the size of a palm and was yellow in color. There were ancient talisman patterns engraved on it, and it was a bit wrinkled. The card paper was very similar to the talisman paper from the ancient cultivation era. The spirit sequence code that Li Daocheng created was very unique. It couldn't be displayed on good talisman cards and could only be used on this kind of obsolete talisman paper. The ritual was recorded. Afterwards, Li Daocheng lowered his requirements and spent half an hour to quickly create 7 different types of talisman cards. The attack-type talisman cards were fire, ice, and thunder talisman cards. The healing-type talisman cards were clear and miasma removal talisman cards. However, all of these talisman cards were only at the 1st level. Li Daocheng used them to practice. However, these talisman cards were a bit stronger than ordinary 1st-level talisman cards. However, these talisman cards were all in the same color and looked a bit unfair to the audience. Just by looking at their appearance, they felt like low-quality goods. At night, Li Daocheng hurriedly ate a large plate of sea beast meat. Then, he took the third-level Golden Bell talisman card that didn't look good and went to the main city's night market. No matter what a third-level talisman card was used for, it could be sold for at least a few thousand Federation coins. The protective talisman card that Li Daocheng created had been simulated and directly withstood the strongest attack of a cultivator at the 9th level of Qi refinement 3 times before it showed signs of weakening. Its strength was self-evident. Li Daocheng entered the spiritual network to understand the market. His Golden Bell talisman card was worth at least 30,000 Federation coins. As for the other first-level talisman cards, their market price was around 1,000 to 2,000 Federation coins. Li Daocheng set the price at 1,500 Federation coins. When Li Daocheng arrived at the night market, it was already rather late. However, the place was still bustling with people coming and going. On both sides of the street were stalls of various sizes selling all kinds of goods. Li Daocheng set up a small table that he had prepared beforehand and placed all the talisman cards on it. Beside the table was an eye-catching piece of cloth with 4 eye-catching words written on it. Talisman cards exclusive. Don't miss this opportunity. If you miss today, wait another year. The Master's products are definitely the best. The third-level Golden Bell talisman card is only selling for 30,000. You didn't hear wrong. Only 30,000. If you can buy it, you'll make a profit. Li Daocheng set up the stall and immediately started shouting. The words he shouted were all kinds of advertising phrases that he remembered from his previous life. The novelty of his shouting attracted quite a few people at first. However, when they saw the wrinkled, finished talisman cards on the table, they immediately lost interest and turned around to leave. There was also a small number of people who directly glared at Li Daocheng. "Boss, you've gone crazy thinking about money, haven't you? This is a third-level talisman card? Who are you trying to fool? Friend, although the quality of my talisman card isn't good, it's easy to use. It's much better than talisman cards of the same grade. If you don't believe me, you can buy it and try it out." "Try it out? Do you think I'm 3 years old? TSK, you're crazy. Hey, don't go. Look at the others. Apart from this one, the rest are all 1,500 each. It's cheap and good." The person had already left. After shouting for over an hour, no one showed any interest. Li Daocheng was full of confidence when he came, but now it was all gone. His heart was tired, and his throat was hoarse from shouting. None of these people knew what was good for them. Li Daocheng complained in his heart, but he had no way to prove it to them. Just like this, time slowly passed. The surrounding stalls were doing well, and no one came to Li Daocheng's stall to look at the goods. The cold wind was bleak. After 11 o'clock, many stall owners began to pack up and leave. The people coming and going also gradually became fewer. Li Daocheng sat alone in the wind. It was his first time setting up a stall, and he had gotten off to a bad start. It was really not easy to make money. When those stall owners left, they all looked at Li Daocheng with ridicule, looking at him as if they were looking at an idiot. Li Daocheng did not mind. Those who did not buy his talisman cards were idiots. He was not afraid of making business difficult, but he was afraid that others would not recognize the goods. Li Daocheng was not willing to give up. He decided to wait. If no one bought anything at 12 o'clock, he would pack up and go back to sleep. Tomorrow, he still had to endure the torture of that which surnamed Chu. Lack of sleep would cause his condition to deteriorate. At that time, he would not be able to withstand the witch's attacks. Yi Feiyue walked from south to north, from the end of the night market to the end, but she still had not bought a decent talisman card. Her beautiful eyebrows slightly wrinkled. If she could not buy a level 3 talisman card today, she would not be able to get first place in tomorrow's competition in the elite class. Duan Yao's mountain-piercing fist was too fierce. Yi Feiyue could not withstand more than 2 consecutive strikes. Yi Feiyue entered Xianshan University as Tianyuan City's top scholar and directly entered the elite class. As a proud daughter of heaven, Yi Feiyue had her own pride. Even in Xianshan University's elite class, she still wanted to be first. However, Duan Yao's appearance completely shattered Yi Feiyue's pride. Since entering the school, Duan Yao had always been a head above Yi Feiyue. The latter could only settle for second place. Yifei was not willing to give up. For more than half a year, she cultivated desperately and studied Duan Yao in all aspects. She was already at the peak of Qi Refining Stage 9 and would definitely reach Qi Refining Stage 10 before the end of term exam. However, Duan Yao was also crazy. His cultivation was always on par with Yifei's, and he steadily suppressed Yifei in combat. In every class competition, Yifei was bound to be unable to withstand Duan Yao's mountain-piercing fists 3 consecutive strikes. As long as she could withstand it, Yifei believed that she could definitely defeat Duan Yao. She could not surpass Duan Yao's cultivation in a short period of time, nor could she practice a profound technique. Her only hope was to buy a level 3 or 4 talisman card. The tutor said that both talisman cards and magical weapons could be used. Yifei's Crimson Moon Sword was a middle-grade, human-grade magical weapon, which was on the same level as Duan Yao's Wilderness Gloves. In this regard, it was not inferior, and in terms of attack, it was even a level higher. However, Crimson Moon Sword had no defensive properties, while Duan Yao's Wilderness Gloves had both offense and defense. No matter how sharp her attack was, it would be blocked by the gloves. Yifei felt that her neglect of defense was the fundamental reason why she lost to Duan Yao every time. Yifei had decided to change to a weapon with both offensive and defensive properties. She had already paid a deposit of 300,000 yuan to the largest refining company, Red Flame Refining Company. She had reserved a middle-grade human-grade flying sword, Condensed Moon, which was custom-made by Yifei. It had both offensive and defensive properties. However, it was not finished yet, and it would take more than half a month for it to be delivered to her. Today, after class, the tutor suddenly announced that there would be a test tomorrow and credits will be calculated. Yifei was irritated at that time. With her current strength, she would still lose to Duan Yao. The problem was her defense. Yifei was very annoyed at being forced to do something beyond her ability, but there was nothing she could do. After thinking about it, the only way was to buy a 3rd grade or above talisman card, preferably a 4th grade one. After class, Yifei went to the largest talisman card sale center in Tianyuan City, the Bustling Pavilion. However, there was no stock, and it would only be available tomorrow afternoon. Yifei wanted to cry, but had no tears. The test would be held tomorrow morning, and the stock in the afternoon had nothing to do with her. In desperation, Yifei could only choose to come to a place like the night market to try her luck. In the end, there was not even a 2nd grade talisman card for sale. Wasn't it said that there was a hermit master in the night market? Wasn't it said that there was no Jianghu master here? Yifei was upset. If she had known this would happen, she would have gone to the underground city. If she went there at this time, she would be asking for trouble. How could this be the best time to kill and steal treasures? As a freshman, she would be sending herself to death. Just as Yifei was about to give up and go back, she heard a series of strange shouts. Chapter 41. 3rd grade Golden Bell Rune Card. Yifei suspected that she had misheard. The Golden Bell Rune Card was one of the more advanced types of protective rune cards. In close combat, the Golden Bell Rune Card was the best choice. Compared to the Shield Rune Card, it had no blind spots. Compared to the Windwall Rune Card, it was more stable. Compared to the Earthwall Rune Card, it was more sturdy. Yifei's eyes lit up, and she looked in the direction of the voice. She saw a young man dressed simply and sloppily shouting at the edge of the night market stall. Seeing the stall owner like this, Yifei was a bit disappointed and felt that he was unreliable. A spirit sequencer who could make 3rd grade rune cards would have to be a steady person. Spirit sequencers were divided into 9 ranks, from low to high: 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, special grade, 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, and the highest was the 5-star spirit sequencer. Before the 3rd grade, there was still the entry level. Those who could make 3rd grade rune cards were 2nd grade spirit sequencers at the very least. Those who graduated from Profound Firmament University's cultivation major in spirit sequencing and talisman making were 2nd grade spirit sequencers under normal circumstances. Although Yifei felt that the stall owner was unreliable, she still walked to the front of the stall. She had no other choice, and there was nothing to lose by looking. Yifei, who was already disappointed, frowned when she saw the crumpled rune card on the table. Her first reaction was that this guy was either a swindler or a fool. Third-grade rune cards were the highest grade among low-grade rune cards. Even second-grade spirit sequencers weren't confident in making them. Second-grade spirit sequencers who could make third-grade rune cards had the qualifications to become first-grade spirit sequencers. First-grade spirit sequencers were very popular in the various large cultivation companies. They could earn money even if they didn't have to work. Moreover, third-grade rune cards were of excellent quality and were in high demand in the market for all kinds of auxiliary third-grade rune cards. At fourth grade, the price wasn't something that ordinary people could afford. Yifei wanted to leave, but there were no other stalls behind her, and the night market was about to end. She thought that she might as well ask for the price. If it was cheap, she could buy it as long as it could be used. It was better than nothing. "Boss, how much is a golden bell rune card?" Yifei asked. 30,000. Li Daochong directly quoted the price. He didn't have much hope for this beautiful customer who came to ask for the price. Yifei's frown deepened. 30,000 for a third-grade charm card wasn't considered expensive. In fact, it was quite fair. However, no matter how Yifei looked at the talisman-like things on the small table, they looked like inferior goods and were more likely to be fake goods. Looking at it this way, the price of 30,000 yuan was obviously a scam. "Are you sure you're selling a third-grade golden bell rune card?" Yifei finally couldn't help but ask. "It's the real deal. If it's fake, I'll compensate you tenfold." Li Daochong didn't want to explain too much when he was questioned again. He had spent a lot of effort to create this level 3 rune card, and its power was half of that of other cards of the same level. It might still be comparable to a level 4 card, but it was definitely a strengthened level 3 card. "You made it?" Yifei asked again. Li Daochong originally wanted to say yes, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was better to dress it up. He really didn't look like a second-grade spirit sequencer who could create a third-grade rune card. If he said that he made it himself, Li Daochong definitely wouldn't be able to produce a second-grade spirit sequencer certification if they wanted to see it. "Not completely. I completed it under my master's guidance." Li Daochong found a simple excuse. In this day and age, people only recognize the person and not the object when making something. As long as it was made by a master, it would definitely be a good thing. No matter how good the nameless person's work was, it wouldn't be good either. Although Li Daochong didn't want to beg others to buy it, it was his first time doing business after all. He wanted to make a name for himself first. This beautiful customer in front of him, no matter what she wore or how she dressed, was obviously a rich customer. If she bought it and used it well, it would be an invisible advertisement. "Is it convenient for you to tell me who your master is?" Yifei continued to ask. She knew a few of the slightly famous spirit sequencers. "It's not convenient." Li Daochong was getting a little impatient with her repeated questions. If she didn't want to buy it, then so be it. If she didn't want to buy it, then so be it. Good things should be sold to people who recognize them. If they didn't, then this brother wouldn't sell it. Yifei picked up the golden bell rune card and wanted to see what it was. However, she didn't know anything about it and couldn't understand it no matter how she looked at it. Li Daochong was in a bad mood. After asking for so long, she didn't buy it. She also didn't ask for his permission before picking it up and flipping it around to look at it. Damn it. Could it be that he met a scammer who was trying to cheat him? Li Daochong's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the beautiful woman's hands. He was afraid that if he wasn't careful, he would fall into this beautiful woman's trap and replace the real thing. Li Daochong was really worried and asked, "Do you want it or not? If not, then please put it down. I'm going to close the stall." Although Yifei didn't know much about rune cards, she had used a lot of them. The quality of the rune card in her hand was just passable. The patterns on it were basically the same as the level 3 rune card she used before, but there were some differences in the details. There was also a very clear spirit energy fluctuation on it, so it shouldn't be a fake. At most, it was an inferior product. She was going to try everything she could. It was better than nothing. 30,000 yuan was nothing to Yi Feiyue's financial strength. She said, "Boss, I want this rune card. Can I transfer the money?" Li Daochong was stunned for a moment. He didn't expect the beautiful woman to really want it. He immediately said, "Sure." Yi Feiyue raised her wristwatch, and Li Daochong did the same. He scanned the spiritual pattern code, and the transfer was successful. Li Daochong's account immediately had 30,000 yuan added to it. In fact, Yi Feiyue had cash and spirit stones on her. She was prepared to sell the protective rune card. Her original plan was to sell a level 4 rune card. Yi Feiyue didn't use cash or spirit stones. She used the transfer because she was extra careful. After the transfer, the account ID on the spiritual net would be recorded. If the Golden Bell rune card she bought was a fake, Yi Feiyue didn't plan to let it go. 30,000 yuan was nothing to her, but she definitely couldn't swallow the anger of being cheated. When the time came, she would be able to find this brat using his spiritual net account. Yi Feiyue didn't mind teaching this kind of peddler a lesson. She wanted to let him know that not everyone could be cheated. Li Daochong naturally didn't know what Yi Feiyue was thinking. After earning 30,000 yuan, he felt at ease. He needed money to treat his father's injuries, eat at home, and renovate the house. Li Daochong also needed money for his own cultivation. In addition to these fixed expenses, Li Daochong still owed that witch, Chu Qianyue, a few 100,000 yuan in debt. Now that he had found a way to make money, Li Daochong felt a lot more at ease. This kind of skill was needed everywhere to make money. After receiving the money, Li Daochong packed up his stall and left. On the way home, he bought 50 kilograms of spirit beast meat and a bottle of top-grade spirit wine, flame fruit liquor, from a barbecue shop. Now that he had made money, he had to reward himself with some good food. The spirit wine was good for his father's injuries. After returning home, the father, son, and Yinping had a good meal. The three of them were very busy these days. Li Tianyang was fully focused on healing his injuries, except for eating and sleeping. Yinping didn't have a moment to rest. Hiring people outside cost money, so Yinping did everything she could herself. Every penny saved was a penny. Li Daochong was at school during the day and came back at night to study the spiritual brain and practice the psychokinesis battle technique. After dinner, the three of them were busy with their own things. On the third day, as soon as Li Daochong entered the zero-gravity room, Chu Qianyue activated the 5th gear of gravity, increasing the gravity by 3 times. The two of them fought. Chu Qianyue controlled her cultivation at the 5th level of refining qi, but it was actually a bit difficult for her. This surprised her quite a bit, but she quickly adapted to the building foundation. Li Daochong was out of luck. Chu Qianyue was simply a madwoman when it came to special training. She didn't know what fatigue was. From time to time, the sound of impact, screams, and muffled groans could be heard from the 5th zero-gravity room. Xianshan University's first-year superclass combat room. 15 genius students would fight each other by drawing lots, and each of them would fight 5 rounds. Now that all the rounds had ended, there was only one final round left. Yi Feiyue versus Duan Yao. The two of them currently had the same number of points, and they had an overwhelming advantage in all the 4 matches. The two of them were even more talented than the others. On the stage, Yi Feiyue's mood was complicated. Every time she faced Duan Yao, she would feel an inexplicable panic. Her cultivation was clearly on par with him, but she just felt that she couldn't beat him. This kind of naturally formed pressure made her feel extremely uncomfortable. Duan Yao stood motionless and calmly looked at Yi Feiyue. The two of them had fought 5 times since the beginning of the semester. Duan Yao had 4 wins and 1 draw, so he had an absolute advantage. He was very clear about Yi Feiyue's trump card. As long as he could resist her ultimate move, Red Lotus Blooming, he could easily defeat her. Begin. Following the order of the homeroom teacher, Lu Jingyuan, the duel officially began. On the stage, Duan Yao and Yi Feiyue moved at the same time. A fist and a sword collided with a loud bang. There was a time limit for the duel. One of them must win within 3 minutes. There was no such thing as a draw. If there was no winner after 3 minutes, both sides would be judged as losers. The homeroom teacher made such a rule so that everyone would fight with all their strength without holding back. Clang! Clang! The sound of metal colliding on the stage was like a shockwave that spread everywhere. The frequency was frighteningly high. The other 13 superclass students below the stage were all shocked. In just a little more than a month, Yi Fei Yue and Duan Yao's strength had made great progress. How in the world did these two freaks cultivate? Lu Ming cried out in alarm. Duan Yao's mountain-piercing fist has already reached the 5th layer. There's even a chi explosion when he punches. Yi Fei Yue is also not bad. Her red lotus sword technique is even faster. Her sword is like a lotus fire. She's at the 9th layer of chi refining and can actually gather chi. Those who could enter the superclass were all geniuses. At this moment, the two people fighting on the stage were no longer geniuses, but freaks. 2.5 minutes passed. The two people on the stage only had afterimages. Their speed was extremely fast, and their oppressive aura spread to the audience below the stage. The 13 spectators were breathless. Some of them were wondering what the result would be if they fought against one of these two. Lu Ming, you're lucky today. You didn't fight against Duan Yao. If you fought against him, how long could you last? Sidalan looked at the two freaks on the stage and asked Lu Ming. Lu Ming was ranked 3rd in the superclass. Less than 10 moves. Lu Ming spoke the truth. Look at you. The thunder profound heaven spirit vein growing on your body is really a waste. Sidalan rolled her eyes. Lu Ming didn't get angry. He shrugged his shoulders and said, I'm a human, not a freak. As he spoke, the oppressive aura on the stage suddenly increased. Duan Yao blocked Yi Fei Yue's red lotus blossom again. Yi Fei Yue is in danger. Yi Fei Yue is still lacking. Duan Yao is too strong. On the stage, Duan Yao avoided the last sword. He revealed a slight smile, and a chi vortex flashed on his right fist, piercing mountain-breaking stone. Almost at the same time, Yi Fei Yue took out a crumpled yellow talisman paper. Chapter 42. Yi Fei Yue will be blown away. Someone exclaimed. Bang! 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 3 muffled bangs were heard. The scene that everyone expected didn't happen. Yi Fei Yue was still standing there, and no one knew when an extremely pale golden light shield had formed around her body. Duan Yao's 3 consecutive strikes were all blocked by the light shield. The whole room was silent. The geniuses of the superclass were shocked with their mouths wide open. Yi Fei Yue used an ordinary amulet card, but it was impossible for an ordinary amulet card to block Duan Yao's strike. A 4th-grade amulet card. Everyone immediately reacted. Yi Fei Yue really spent a lot of money. She actually bought a 4th-grade amulet card. It cost at least a few $100,000, but it's gone after 1 use. Someone suddenly realized. What a waste. A few $100,000 can buy a good low-grade, human-grade magic weapon. Yi Fei Yue really went all out for a few points. The class instructor, Lu Jingyuan, looked surprised. She didn't expect Yi Fei Yue to use such a powerful amulet card. That thin light shield had an unimaginable defensive power. Lu Jingyuan felt that even if she hit it with all her strength, she would only be able to scatter the light shield and would not be able to form an aftershock attack. This amulet card was definitely made by a master. On the stage, Duan Yao was even more shocked than the others. He had used his wilderness gloves to unleash 3 consecutive strikes, but he hadn't even been able to break through a single layer of protective light. Yi Fei Yue was so shocked that she even forgot to launch a counterattack. She didn't expect that the low-grade amulet she bought for $30,000 would have such a strong defensive power. She thought it would be good enough to block one of Duan Yao's punches, but it actually blocked all 3 without being scattered. Who was that peddler's master? The 3rd-grade amulet card's effect actually reached the 4th-grade level of protection. Yi Fei Yue was momentarily dazed. Then, she backhanded her sword. Duan Yao raised his hand to block, but the 3-hit combo consumed too much energy and his body was empty. He was directly hit and staggered. Yi Fei Yue seized the opportunity and struck 7 times. Finally, Duan Yao couldn't dodge and had a sword on his neck. Yi Fei Yue wins. The class instructor, Lu Jingyuan immediately announced. The unexpected result caused a burst of exclamations from the audience. However, most of them felt that it was a bit wasteful for Yi Feiyue to spend a huge sum of money in exchange for points in a small test. The price of a 4th-grade rune card was exorbitant, and the one Yi Feiyue was using was a relatively good one, so the price would probably be even more expensive, at least a few $100,000. Yi Feiyue herself couldn't believe that she had actually won. Yi Feiyue wasn't in the mood for the rest of the class. Her mind was filled with that Golden Bell rune card. That peddler hadn't lied to her. It really was a level 3 rune card. No, it was an enhanced level 3 rune card. The peddler's master was definitely a special grade spirit sequencer or above. Such a person would definitely be a popular figure in the universe, let alone the Shenhua Federation. Yi Feiyue's intestines were green with regret after being able to buy such a powerful talisman card for only 30,000 yuan. She shouldn't have bought more at that time and directly bought 10 of them. This sentence kept echoing in Yi Feiyue's mind. Yi Feiyue immediately turned on her wristwatch. However, the ID from yesterday's transfer record showed that it was an invalid account. There was no information at all. Yi Feiyue stared at her wristwatch with her mouth wide open. Who could block their account on the spiritual nexus without leaving any trace? A spirit sequencer. Only a spirit sequencer could do that. A star-grade spirit sequencer? Yi Feiyue's delicate body trembled. Chu Qinhua looked at Li Daochong, who was lying on the ground not far away and struggling to stand up again and again. A trace of emotion appeared in her pair of pitch-black eyes. She seemed to have seen her past self. This guy was completely different from the description in the file. Not only was he not a fool, but he was also quite cunning. Chu Qinhua suspected that Li Daochong was a fox in his previous life. Although Chu Qinhua suppressed her cultivation to level 5 of Qi refining, compared to a real level 5 Qi refining practitioner, Chu Qinhua was much stronger. Her plan was to first fight Li Daochong in the space of disorder while at level 5 of Qi refining. This kind of training was the best way to improve one's spatial perception. Chu Qinhua's goal was to have a very accurate spatial perception at level 5 of Qi refining. Then she would continue to lower her cultivation until she reached level 1 of Qi refining. When she reached level 1 of Qi refining, she would still be able to fight Li Daochong to a draw, and her spatial perception would reach another level. But today, not only was Chu Qinhua unable to lower her cultivation to fight Li Daochong, she even raised her cultivation to level 6 of Qi refining. Otherwise, Chu Qinhua would have been miserably beaten up by this guy today. This guy's comprehension of spatial perception was simply inconceivable, and his cultivation was also much stronger than the last time she tested him. But Chu Qinhua didn't think much of this. She had seen too many geniuses, including herself. But Chu Qinhua had never seen someone as tenacious as Li Daochong. Even Battle Sword Augustine was inferior to him. This guy was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. No matter how she beat him up, he would always be able to stand up again in the end. Even if his bones were broken in more than a dozen places, as long as his vitals weren't injured, he would be able to stand up again. Come on, let's fight. Let's continue. Li Daochong clamored, but his body was swaying. That's all for today. Go to the healing room. Chu Qinhua looked at the time and said, she had other training to do a while. You said it. Today it's still 20,000. Now I still owe you 460,000. With that, Li Daochong turned around and went to the healing room. As soon as he entered the healing room, Li Daochong climbed into the spiritual liquid and breathed a sigh of relief. The pores on his body opened up and crazily absorbed the nutrients in the spiritual liquid to repair his body. Just as Li Daochong was lying comfortably in the spiritual liquid tank and sleeping soundly, the Qiao family announced to the public that on the 16th of next month, Qiao Shima and Li Daochong would get married at the Spirit Lake Villa at the foot of Tianyuan Mountain. As soon as this news came out, the people of Tianyuan City were in an uproar. It also caused quite a stir among the cultivation families. The Qiao family's decision was far beyond people's expectations. In fact, the marriage of Qiao Shima and Li Daochong itself didn't attract much attention. The Qiao family was just a small family. Xiao Shima was called the #1 beauty, but in fact, it was thanks to Li Tianyang. If he hadn't taken a fancy to Xiao Shima and appointed her as his daughter-in-law, the title of the #1 beauty in Tianyuan City might not have fallen on Xiao Shima's head. At that time, Li Tianyang was still the #1 expert in Blue Bay Star, the head of the Li family, one of the 4 major families and the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the 3rd Army in the Northern Frontier Star region. He was equivalent to a feudal lord. If he stamped his feet, the Blue Bay Star would shake 3 times. A casual sentence from him could be regarded as a holy scripture. Could the woman that Li Tianyang took a fancy to be wrong? There was no mistake. Because of this, Xiao Shima was called the #1 beauty. After all, she was the daughter-in-law of the #1 expert. Of course, Xiao Shima didn't disappoint the #1 expert. Indeed, the older she grew, the more beautiful she became. Li Daocheng's reputation for being a fool spread far and wide. He had always been a laughingstock. If it wasn't for Li Tianyang, who would he be? No one knew, and no one cared. Therefore, this marriage was only noticed because of Li Tianyang. Later, Li Tianyang's incident happened. The Li family forced the Qiao family to return the betrothal gifts, which made the whole marriage complicated and confusing. The people liked to see the miscellaneous things behind the backs of the rich and powerful families, and the attention kept on rising. However, after Li Tianyang fell from grace, almost everyone thought that the Qiao family would never marry Xiao Shima to that fool, Li Daocheng. Unfortunately, everyone was wrong. The Qiao family married their precious daughter to Li Daocheng. As the saying goes, fortune favors fools. It was naturally good that the people had so many things to talk about after dinner. However, Xiao Shima's pursuers, admirers, and those who wanted to possess her beat their chests inside. It was like a bolt of lightning on a sunny day. Someone once publicly announced on the spiritual nexus that Xiao Shima would never marry Li Daocheng. If they got married, he would live stream himself eating **T. That person's post was completely deleted. From then on, the person in question changed his appearance and disappeared without a trace. In the Zhan family's villa, Zhan Honglai was engulfed in anger. He had been grounded for 7 days. During these 7 days, Zhan Honglai had undergone hellish training under Zhan Jintian's personal supervision. After the conflict with Li Daocheng at the school gate last time was witnessed by Blizzard Bing, that woman came to visit his home as expected. Zhan Honglai was reprimanded once again, and Zhan Honglai was slapped 3 times on the spot. Zhan Honglai wasn't afraid of anything but his father. This time, his confinement would continue until the end of the term test. Zhan Jintian said that if he couldn't get a good ranking in the end of the term test, he would break Zhan Honglai's legs and then break them again. Zhan Honglai was afraid. Even if he was so angry that his eyes were bloodshot, he didn't dare to disobey his father's orders. Moreover, his father's people were guarding outside the villa, so he couldn't get out. Zhan Honglai sent a message to Zhan Shaoqing, the one with the greatest potential among the younger generation of the Zhan family side branch. He was 20 years old and was at the peak of the 5th level of qi refinement. Zhan Shaoqing wanted to become a core member of the Zhan family, so he listened to Zhan Honglai's every word. "Brother Lai, who made you angry? I'll tear him apart," Zhan Shaoqing said, as if he was swearing an oath. He tried his best to show off in front of Zhan Honglai. Zhan Honglai was talented, and it was only a matter of time before he succeeded Zhan Jintian. If he was loyal now, once he took over, Zhan Shaoqing would also become a core member of the Zhan family. Zhan Honglai's face darkened as he whispered in Zhan Shaoqing's ear, "As long as you help me with this, the position of the Zhan family's general manager will be yours in the future." Zhan Shaoqing was overjoyed. "Thank you, Brother Lai. Don't worry, this is easy. Just wait for my good news." Zhan Honglai nodded. "Just do it. I've already told Su Liang and Lu Hao to listen to your orders." Li Qingyao wants to use Lu Hao's father's connections in the bank to find evidence of the Li family's prodigal son, Li Tianyang, misappropriating the Li family's funds. Just find an excuse, and she'll take the bait and use her to lure Li Tianyang out. That bitching Ping is alone at home, so I don't need to teach her what to do next. Chapter 43. After leaving the training hall, Li Daochong stretched his body. The effects of the enhanced healing liquid provided by Chu Qianyue were extraordinary. Every time he soaked in it, not only did it heal Li Daochong's injuries, but it also strengthened his body after each tempering session. The strengthening effect might not be obvious, but after accumulating for more than 10 days, his body's strength had increased significantly. Li Daochong's originally thin and weak body was now much stronger. Although he still looked thin, he was no longer as skinny as before. His muscles were as sharp as a knife, and his face was white and clean, with a trace of foolishness. After leaving the school, Li Daochong was about to speed up and run home when he heard someone calling him from behind. Li Daochong. He turned around and saw that it was Ouyang Qian. After the trip to the underground city, Li Daochong had not seen her again. Seeing her rushing over, he felt a bit strange. "What's the matter?" "I just saw your sister being forcefully dragged into a floating car towards the South Lake." Ouyang Qian's expression was a bit flustered. The corner of Li Daochong's eye twitched. When Li Tianyang returned, he felt strange that Li Qingyao did not appear. Later, Li Qingyao secretly contacted Li Tianyang and told him that she was about to obtain evidence of Li Tianyang embezzling the family's funds, so it was temporarily inconvenient for her to appear. Li Tianyang returned with serious injuries. At that time, he thought that he did not have much time left. Even if the family abandoned him, there was nothing he could do. He only wanted to live out the rest of his life peacefully. However, the heavens helped the worthy. Li Tianyang's serious injuries were healed by his son. The spirit placenta gradually recovered, and Jindan also showed signs of recovery. Li Tianyang was reborn, so naturally, he could not let the matter of the family abandoning him go so easily. The Li family's achievements today were mainly due to Li Tianyang. After his accident, not only did the family not help him, they even kicked him out with serious injuries. How could Li Tianyang swallow this resentment? He was also very supportive of Li Qingyao collecting evidence of Li Jinghua's crimes. Li Daochong naturally supported his father's plan, so he didn't go to Li Qingyao. Now that he heard that Li Qingyao had been kidnapped, Li Daochong knew that something was wrong. It was very likely that this girl had exposed herself. Previously in the underground city, Li Daochong felt that Li Qingyao did not do things carefully. Li Daochong glanced in the direction of the southern lake. Without saying a word, the spiritual aura in his entire body exploded, and he was about to madly dash over. "Li Daochong, take my car. I've placed a tracking talisman on the vehicle," Ouyang Qian said as she walked to the side of the street where her vehicle was parked. Li Daochong didn't hesitate to jump in. No matter how fast he ran, he couldn't possibly outrun the floating vehicle. The South Lake was so big that it was impossible for him to find the exact location. Ouyang Qian followed him into the car, started the engine, and flew away. "You know Li Qingyao?" Li Daochong didn't know much about Ouyang Qian. Previously, she had brought him into a haunted house for a few spirit stones. If he hadn't had the hot-blooded upgrader at the time, he would have been sucked dry by the 3 short ghosts. Li Daochong learned from his past mistakes. He didn't trust Ouyang Qian's character very much. "I'm not very familiar with Li Qingyao, but we did an activity together last semester. Today, she asked me to meet her at Floating Cloud Street on the west side of the campus and asked me to deliver something to a place in the west side of the city. She said that it was inconvenient for her to go because someone was following her, so I came over at the appointed time. However, before I could get out of the hovercraft, I saw another hovercraft stop beside her. 2 people got out and roughly dragged her into the vehicle. Li Qingyao resisted and was slapped in the face. Ouyang Qian could tell that Li Daochong was a little worried about her, so she immediately explained what had happened. Li Daochong knew that Ouyang Qian ran errands for people on the spiritual net. Later on, he did a simple investigation on Ouyang Qian. Li Daochong's face was expressionless as he asked, "Since you were on Floating Cloud Street, how did you know that I would leave the school at this time?" Ouyang Qian was a bit unhappy with Li Daochong's excessive cautiousness, so she frowned and said, "Li Daochong, I don't think I need to explain too much to you. If you don't believe me, you could get out of the car right now." I was chasing after that car to South Lake. If you want to go to South Lake from Floating Cloud Street, you have to pass through the school gate. I didn't dare to chase after it alone, so I was about to call a few of my classmates to go with me. Li Daocheng didn't say anything more. Last time in the underground city's ghost castle, although Ouyang Qian was an accomplice, she actually didn't know anything about it. She was only used by someone and almost became a burial object. After a while, Li Daocheng saw that Ouyang Qian was about to cry from anger. He said, "Last time I was almost killed by you, so I asked a few more questions so as to avoid falling into a pit again." Ouyang Qian said in a huff, "Last time, I was wrong. I was just leading the way. I didn't know that someone wanted to harm you. Didn't I almost lose my life?" Li Daocheng turned his face to look at Ouyang Qian. "You know, didn't you say that I drugged you and did something to your car?" Ouyang Qian's mood eased a little. At that time, I had just woken up and didn't know anything. I took it out of context, but that kind of scene would make anyone misunderstand. You don't have to keep it in mind. Li Daocheng said indifferently, "I don't like to be wronged." "Then how did you know that I didn't harm you?" Ouyang Qian hesitated for a moment before replying, "I have an Echo Talisman card on me. I know everything after seeing the Echo." Li Daocheng's eyes narrowed slightly. He repeated with a deeper meaning, "You know everything?" Ouyang Qian knew that Li Daocheng was referring to the matter of him hiding his strength. She pursed her lips and pretended not to understand. She continued, "My tracking talisman was bought with money. When I find your sister, you have to pay me for the talisman." Li Daocheng smiled. With a flash of telekinesis, he took out 2 spirit stones from the small Nayu bag hanging on his waist and said, "One for the tracking talisman and the other for the taxi. Please hurry up. If you can't find my sister as soon as possible, I won't give you a single cent." Seeing the spirit stones, Ouyang Qian's beautiful eyes sparkled. The haze on her face disappeared. "Then sit tight. I'm going to speed up." Whoosh! Ouyang Qian stepped on the talisman array pedal as hard as she could. The floating car suddenly accelerated and shot out like an arrow. There were countless floating cars in the sky above Tianyuan City. There were also cultivators flying on swords. The road was extremely complicated. Ouyang Qian wasn't affected at all. She drove the floating car up, down, left, and right. In less than 20 minutes, they entered the South Lake area. This was the southernmost part of Tianyuan City. The South Lake was the largest freshwater lake on Blue Bay Star. It was surrounded by banks and shrubbery. There were also some hills that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. The geography here was quite complicated and the area was huge. Looking for a floating car here was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Fortunately, Ouyang Qian had the Echo Talisman. She followed the spiritual waves of the Echo Talisman and quickly found the floating car. The other party had just arrived and was slowly descending into a forest in the distance. Ouyang Qian didn't approach before landing. "Wait here. Don't follow me." Li Daocheng's voice was still echoing when he disappeared. Ouyang Qian sat in the driver's seat with a shocked expression. Her mouth was wide open, but she couldn't say a word. She didn't see how Li Daocheng left. What was this brat's cultivation? Li Daocheng had to endure 5 times the normal gravity in the chaotic gravity environment. He had to fight against Chu Qianyue, the witch. Plus, he was in the 8th layer of the Qi refining realm. His speed was not something that Ouyang Qian could see clearly. Chapter 44. Lu Hao, why did you bring me here? After Li Qingyao was dragged out of the car, she glared at a tall and handsome young man and questioned him. "What do you think?" Lu Hao sneered. "How would I know?" Li Qingyao gritted her teeth. Other than Lu Hao, another person got out of the car. It was Zhang Xiaocheng, and there were 2 other strong men who looked like thugs. Li Qingyao knew something was wrong when she was dragged into the car, but she didn't have much strength to resist. If she resisted fiercely, who knew what would happen? Along the way, Li Qingyao just kept a cold face. In order to avoid angering these 2 people, she chose to wait and see. Seeing Zhang Xiaocheng, Li Qingyao knew something was wrong. Ever since she was tricked in the underground city, she lost contact with Zhang Honglai and the others. That time, she contacted the 3 fake Nightwalkers through Zhang Honglai. No matter how stupid Li Qingyao was, she knew that she was tricked by Zhang Honglai. Now that Zhang Xiaocheng suddenly appeared and brought her to this place where even birds don't shit, she knew that he didn't have good intentions. However, Li Qingyao didn't believe that these two guys would dare to do anything to her. With a cold face, she said, "You better let me go quickly, or else my father won't let you go." "Ha ha." Zhang Xiaocheng laughed and said, "Your father? Are you talking about the person whose placenta ruptured and Jindan was damaged and is about to die? I'm so scared." Lu Hao also looked fearless. His eyes turned slightly and said, "Li Qingyao, since your father is so powerful, why don't you call him over too?" Li Qingyao bit her lower lip and didn't move. Li Tianyang was seriously injured. How could he save her? "Lu Hao, why are you with the Zhan family? Aren't you afraid that your master, Hong Junhui, will break your legs if he finds out?" Li Qingyao provoked. "Hong Junhui is just a guy from a branch of the Hong family. Do you think he's Hongwu? Lu Hao has always been my man." "Li Qingyao, don't you want Li Jinghua's anonymous transfer records? I can give it to you, but I have a condition." Zhang Xiaoqing smiled. "What condition?" Li Qingyao was a little surprised. She didn't expect Zhang Xiaocheng to suddenly change the topic and want to make a deal with her. "Don't worry, I'll show you the goods first," Zhang Xiaocheng said as he gave Lu Hao a look. Lu Hao immediately took out a spirit card and inserted it into his wristwatch, projecting a spirit image. It clearly recorded the transfer records of Li Jinghua, using his position to embezzle family funds in the past 3 years. The entire account was a backstage record transmitted from Li Jinghua's private account. As long as this thing was taken out, Li Jinghua would be finished. After Li Qingyao saw it clearly, Lu Hao put away the spirit card and said, "Li Qingyao, don't say that I took your fire elemental bead for free. I got what you wanted, but one fire elemental bead isn't enough. As long as you do one more thing, this account's spirit card will be yours. You can deal with Li Jinghua however you want. That's your Li family's internal affairs. We can't interfere. What do you think?" Li Qingyao pursed her lips. She really wanted that spirit card. As long as she got it, the Li family's great elderly boyo and grandson Li Jinghua would definitely be kicked out of the family tree. Without the great elder's obstruction, her father might be treated fairly by the family. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Li Qingyao asked. "It's very simple. Send a 1,000-mile sound transmission to Li Tianyang. Just say that you're in danger and are at South Lake. Ask him to come and save you." Lu Hao raised his eyebrows. When Li Qingyao heard this, she immediately became alert. She looked at Lu Hao and Zhang Xiaocheng with a trace of fear in her eyes. Lu Hao's words were too strange. Li Qingyao suddenly realized that these two people's target was most likely not her, but Li Tianyang. Could it be that Li Boyo wanted to secretly kill her father? Li Qingyao felt a chill run down her spine. Seeing that Li Qingyao didn't move, Zhang Xiaoqing said impatiently, "Lu Hao, why are you wasting so much effort? Su Yang is still waiting to make a move. Just feed her the immortal herb. Are you afraid that she won't listen to you? The two of you, hold her down." The two big men behind Zhang Xiaocheng immediately moved. The two of them looked at Li Qingyao as if they were looking at a little chick. Li Qingyao's heart sank into despair and helplessness. She turned around and ran, but she was caught after just 2 steps. The two big men were actually 4th-level Qi practitioners. They were even more powerful than the 3 people she met in the underground city. "Feed her." Zhang Xiaoqing's eyes were fierce as he ordered. The two big men took out a bottle of blue liquid at the same time. There were several vine-like plants soaked in the bottle. There were bright flowers growing on the vines. It was a very high-quality, immortal herb. If a drug addict saw it, they would definitely go crazy. This bottle of immortal herb liquid was worth more than 100,000 Federation coins. Li Qingyao struggled desperately in despair. But how could she break free with her little strength? Once she touched the immortal herb, she would never be able to stop. This thing would fuse with her body, making her unable to stop. From then on, she would only want to suck the immortal herb and become a walking corpse that didn't care about anything else. Zhang Xiaocheng, You will die a horrible death." Li Qingyao screamed hysterically in despair. "What are you two waiting for? Feed her," Zhang Xiaocheng said fiercely. "Whoever wants to die, feed her." A cold voice came from the bushes nearby. A figure flashed over. Zhang Xiaocheng and Lu Hao didn't know that someone was lying in ambush nearby. They didn't even see how the figure appeared. In short, when they came back to their senses, a young man with a tender face had already appeared in front of them. Zhang Xiaocheng and Lu Hao didn't recognize Li Daocheng immediately. They had only heard rumors about Li Daocheng. Lu Hao had never seen him in person, and Zhang Xiaocheng had only seen him a few times. Li Qingyao was stunned. Her small mouth that was tightly shut couldn't help but open slightly. She looked at Li Daocheng in disbelief. Although Li Daocheng's face didn't change much, Li Qingyao couldn't recognize him at this moment. Her cold gaze had never appeared on him before. "Brother." Li Qingyao's face froze. She subconsciously called out, "Qingyao, long time no see." Li Daocheng nodded. "You're Li Daocheng?" Zhang Xiaocheng finally reacted. His nervous expression relaxed. "I was wondering who it was." "So it's you fool. Li Tianyang is also here." While speaking, Zhang Xiaocheng looked around. He shot out a detection talisman in his hand. It instantly covered a range of hundreds of meters. Soon, he got a response. Within a radius of 800 meters, there was no one else except them. After detecting that there was no one else, Zhang Xiaocheng felt his heart ache. This detection talisman was a third-level talisman. One talisman cost 180,000 yuan. With a casual toss, 180,000 yuan was gone. The detection result was nothing. If he knew that there was no one, he wouldn't have used it. At the same time, Lu Hao also used other methods to detect the surroundings. The result was the same. There was no one. When Zhang Xiaocheng and Lu Hao confirmed that Li Daocheng was alone, their faces completely relaxed. The two were afraid of Li Tianyang. No matter how heavily injured a Jindan cultivator was, he was definitely not someone that a qi refining cultivator like them could contend against. One look from him could destroy them. As for Li Daocheng, in their eyes, he couldn't even withstand a single blow. Naturally, there was no need to be nervous. Chapter 45. "Brother, let's go. Don't worry about me." Li Qingyao suddenly shouted. "Go. Do you think you can leave?" Zhang Xiaoqing teased. He looked at Lu Hao and said, "Lu Hao, you catch Li Qingyao. You two tie up that idiot. Later, we will have a big brother and sister show. Record it and upload it to the Spirit Net. I believe it will be very interesting." Li Daocheng, how do you think the Qiao family will react when they see it? Li Daocheng's cold expression turned vicious after Zhang Xiaocheng said such shameless words that had no bottom line. After Zhang Xiaocheng finished speaking, Lu Hao immediately went to catch Li Qingyao so that the two men could free up their hands. However, the two men who caught Li Qingyao did not move at all. Lu Hao strangely pushed one of the men. Pudong. The burly man fell straight to the ground. "What's going on?" Zhang Xiaoqing frowned. Lu Hao leaned over and saw that the man was foaming at the mouth. His pupils were dilated and his expression was stiff. He had fainted. "Brother Cheng, he seems to be addicted to drugs." Lu Hao guessed when he saw the man's chest rise and fall. "Damn it, he actually got addicted at this time. See how I will deal with him when we get back." Zhang Xiaocheng cursed angrily. "Pudong." Just as he was speaking, another big man also fell down stiffly. When Li Daocheng appeared, he had already used his telekinesis attack on the two men and directly knocked them out. With the two men down, Lu Hao was afraid that Li Qingyao would run away. He did not care about what happened to the two men and reached out to catch Li Qingyao. "Ha!" Lu Hao just reached out when his wrist was grabbed by a large hand. He turned around and saw that Li Daocheng had appeared in front of him. Lu Hao was shocked. His other hand clenched into a fist and punched towards Li Daocheng's face. However, his fist was only halfway out. "Ah!" Lu Hao let out a tragic cry. His face twisted together as he knelt on the ground. "Kacha!" The sound of bones breaking. Lu Hao's wrist, which was being held by Li Daocheng, was in a strange shape. It was already broken. Everything happened too quickly and too suddenly. Li Qingyao, who was standing beside Li Daocheng, opened her mouth wide as she stared at Li Daocheng in a daze. Was this still her foolish brother? It was as if Li Qingyao had just met Li Daocheng for the first time. Aside from his appearance, Li Qingyao could not tell anything about Li Daocheng from the past. Bang! Li Daocheng loosened his grip and kicked Lu Hao in the chest. The latter was sent flying like a kite with its string cut. He landed heavily 5 meters away and lay motionless on the ground. Zhang Xiaoqing's eyes were filled with shock. He looked at Li Daocheng with eyes full of doubt and confusion. Didn't this fool not even have a spirit vein? Lu Hao was a 4th-layer qi refining cultivator, only 1 step away from the 5th layer. He was actually insta-killed by Li Daocheng. How is that possible? Before Zhang Xiaoqing could react, a figure flashed in front of him. Li Daocheng had already appeared in front of him. Zhang Xiaoqing was so scared that he took 3 steps back. "You're not Li Daocheng?" Zhang Xiaoqing asked in shock. That was the only possibility he could think of. Just as he finished speaking, Zhang Xiaoqing was sent flying more than 10 meters away. Half of his face was badly mutilated. Li Daocheng was expressionless as he slowly walked towards Zhang Xiaoqing. "Don't come over!" Zhang Xiaoqing screamed in fear. Li Daocheng ignored him and walked over step by step. "Tui, damn it, don't force me." Zhang Xiaoqing spat out a mouthful of blood and said angrily. Li Daocheng was still walking forward at the same speed. "Armor break." Zhang Xiaoqing waved his hand and a silver light shot out. Armor break talisman card. Zhang Xiaoqing's life-saving trump card. It was a level 2 strengthened armor break talisman, specially used to deal with ghost beasts with thick skin. Dang! There was a crisp sound. A Zamadeo appeared in Li Daocheng's hand and easily blocked the armor break talisman. Even if it was a strengthened level 2 talisman card, it couldn't cause damage to a low-grade human tier talisman unless it reached level 3. When Zhang Xiaoqing saw that the situation was not right, he turned around and ran. Before he could run 2 steps, Li Daocheng had already appeared in front of him. Their speeds were not on the same level. The Zamadeo chopped down. Zhang Xiaoqing shouted, "Li Daocheng, you can't kill me. I'm from the Zhang family. If you kill me, the Zhang family won't let you go. The cultivator police will also find you and bring you to the cultivation court for trial." The Zamadeo in Li Daocheng's hand stopped in midair. It wasn't that Li Daocheng was afraid of the Zhang family, but at that moment, Zhang Xiaoqing reminded him that if he killed this guy directly, the Federation Security Bureau would not be easy to fool. Zhang Xiaoqing secretly heaved a sigh of relief, thinking that Li Daocheng was afraid. He said, "Li Daocheng, you're smart. You're no longer a member of the Li family. What can you use to fight with the Zhang family? As long as you let me go, I'll tell you why I captured your sister today." Li Daocheng narrowed his eyes and slowly put down the Zamadeo. "Speak." Zhang Xiaoqing looked at Li Daocheng warily and said, "Let me sit in the floating car, and I'll tell you." As soon as he said that, Zhang Xiaoqing's stomach was punched. "Wah!" Zhang Xiaoqing even vomited bile. "You!" Zhang Xiaoqing spat out a word, and his stomach was punched again. His internal organs seemed to have been shattered. Li Daocheng raised his fist again. "Wait a minute, I'll talk." Zhang Xiaoqing was shocked. Li Daocheng's fist was too heavy. If he took another punch, he would really vomit blood. "We captured Li Qingyao to lure Li Tianyang here. There's an ambush at the house where you live. As long as Li Tianyang leaves, they'll go and capture Yinping." Zhang Xiaoqing had no choice but to reveal the whole plan. Li Daocheng's gaze turned colder. "Zhang Honglai told you to do it?" Zhang Xiaoqing hesitated. He didn't dare to betray Zhang Honglai, but Li Daocheng's fist could land on him at any time. Li Daocheng only asked one question. He waited for a few seconds, but Zhang Xiaoqing still didn't say anything. Then he raised his fist again. Zhang Xiaoqing clutched his stomach, and his eyeballs almost fell out. He was so scared that he hurriedly said, "Yes, it was Zhang Honglai who told me to do it." As soon as Zhang Xiaoqing's voice fell, Li Daocheng swung his hand, and the former's vision turned black, and he fainted. Li Daocheng originally wanted to kill him, but after careful consideration, he restrained himself. Even if Zhang Honglai had the power of his family, and even had connections with the underground forces of the underground city, he didn't directly kill him, a fool who was abandoned by his family and had no one to rely on. Obviously, he had some scruples about the Federation's cultivation method. The cultivator police of the Federation's Security Bureau weren't to be trifled with. Zhang Honglai instructed Zhang Xiaocheng to take such a big detour, and the final target was Yin Ping. There was only one reason, and that was Yin Ping's identity wasn't protected by the Federation's cultivation method. They could do whatever they wanted with her, and it didn't matter if she died. At most, they just had to pay for it, and it wouldn't violate the Federation's cultivation method. Li Daocheng had completely calmed down at this time. If he really killed Zhang Xiaocheng and Lu Hao, or even the two burly men, the Zhang family's revenge would be small, but it would be troublesome if he was arrested by the Federation's Security Bureau. In the ancient cultivation era, people killed without hesitation, but with the continuous development of the cultivation civilization, they were gradually controlled. If not, in this world where everyone could cultivate, everything would go out of control and fall into complete chaos. There was no need for the Hades to invade, and humans would destroy themselves. Until Li Daocheng brought Li Qingyao to Ouyang Qian's floating car. She was still looking at Li Daocheng with a shocked expression. "Qingyao, is there something on my face?" Li Daocheng touched his face and asked. "Oh no." Li Qingyao's face turned red, and she screamed and lowered her head. Li Daocheng gave the promised 2 spirit stones to Ouyang Qian. After receiving the spirit stones, Ouyang Qian beamed with joy. She took the money and did things for him, and she sent the brother and sister home. Because Li Tianyang hadn't been lured out, Li Daocheng wasn't worried about home. Although Li Tianyang was still recovering, those below the qi gathering stage were definitely not his match. When he got home, just as Li Daocheng expected, with Li Tianyang overseeing things, Zhang Honglia's lackeys didn't dare to make a move. As usual, Yin Ping tidied up the other rooms. When Li Qingyao saw Li Tianyang sobbing, Li Daocheng quietly left the room. Li Daocheng returned to his room. Just as he was fiddling with the brain on the table, his wristwatch flashed. He opened it and saw that it was a long-distance message from Qiao Shima. "The wedding date has been announced, and the invitations are being sent out. Come with me to a friend's birthday party next week." After reading it, Li Daocheng curled his lips and closed the message. He immediately immersed himself in the brain's spirit sequence. Making a level 3 rune card every night had become a compulsory course for him. In the following days, Li Daocheng battled with Chu Qianyue in the weightless room for 5 hours every day. He soaked in the strengthened healing elixir for an hour, and then went to the library to browse various books on spirit-based programming for 3 hours. At night, when he returned home, he focused on spirit sequence coding and making rune cards. Before going to bed, he would cultivate the telekinesis battle technique. Li Daocheng had always been on guard against the revenge of the Zhang family, but a few days passed peacefully. Zhang Honglai was picked up by someone every day. It was said that after Blizzard Bing's home visit, Zhang Honglia's father put him under control. This news couldn't be better for Li Daocheng, and he devoted all his attention to learning and cultivation. During this time, Xiao Shima looked for Li Daocheng a few times, and the two of them had a few meals together. While pretending to be a couple, Xiao Shima clearly explained some of the wedding matters to Li Daocheng. A few days later, Xiao Shima drove a star-grade floating vehicle and brought Li Daocheng to Tianyuan City's tallest building, cloud-piercing tower, to attend the birthday party of a good friend of hers. It was said that this good friend's identity wasn't ordinary. She wasn't from Blue Bay Star, and her family's influence was mainly on Red Sun Star. However, they had business dealings with many cultivation companies on Blue Bay Star, and the Qiao family was one of them. Xiao Shima brought Li Daocheng with her to put on a show. Bringing her fiancé to a friend's birthday party was naturally to foreshadow the upcoming wedding. Li Daocheng wasn't keen on this kind of thing, but since he had already agreed to Xiao Shima's fake marriage and had even taken the deposit, he naturally couldn't refuse. But when he saw his good friend, Xiao Shima, he immediately pulled his collar to cover half of his face, not wanting her to recognize him. "Happy birthday, Zeno." Xiao Shima saw her good friend and immediately greeted her with a warm hug. Chapter 46. Li Daocheng didn't expect that the friend Qiao Shima mentioned was actually her, the daughter of the middle-aged man he had treated in Zixiao People's Hospital last time. The world was big, but it was also small. Li Daocheng didn't want to be recognized, so he pulled his collar and stood aside. Although Qiao Shima brought Li Daocheng to such an occasion, she actually rejected it in her heart. In the end, Li Daocheng was really unpresentable. If it weren't for the Li family's pressure recently, Qiao Shima wouldn't even want to go through with the fake marriage. The family status on Red Sun Star was higher than the 4 major families on Blue Bay Star. And Sinuo lived in Blue Bay Star for a while when she was a child and was fostered in her aunt's house. She happened to be neighbors with Qiao Shima, so the two met. If not for this, it would be impossible for the Qiao family to get in touch with a big family like the Yin family. Although Sinuo didn't have a sense of superiority and arrogance, how to introduce Li Daocheng on such an occasion still made Qiao Shima feel ashamed. After exchanging greetings with Sinuo, Qiao Shima pulled Li Daocheng over with a smile on her face, but there was a big shadow in her heart. She introduced, Sinuo, this is my fiancé, Li Daocheng. And Sinuo knew that Qiao Shima would bring her fiancé over today, so she was naturally mentally prepared to check for her friend. Of course, and Sinuo had known for a long time that Qiao Shima had a stupid fiancé, but she had been born in an aristocratic family since she was a child, so how could she not know her friend's helplessness? Therefore, she had never asked about this marriage in front of her friend. Perhaps because Qiao Shima's stupid fiancé was too famous, and Sinuo was also very curious. She had never seen him before. In Sinuo's impression, a fool should have a dull face all day long, drooling mouth, slurring speech, looking deformed, or lacking a string in the brain and having difficulties in communication. However, when Sinuo saw the young man Qiao Shima pulled over, he didn't have any characteristics of a fool in her impression. He was handsome, fair, and half a head taller than the slender Qiao Shima. Except for looking a little weak, everything else was normal. It was impolite to stare at people, so Sinuo retracted her gaze after a glance and extended her hand politely. Sinuo, I'm Sinuo. Qiao Shima is my good friend. You have to treat her well in the future. Okay. Li Daocheng reached out and gently shook Sinuo's hand. He quickly retracted his hand and hid half of his face behind his collar. Hello. Qiao Shima often talks about you. Happy birthday. Qiao Shima was worried that Li Daocheng would be stupid, so after introducing Li Daocheng, she deliberately sent him away and said, Daocheng, Sinuo and I haven't seen each other for a long time. Let's have a chat first. If you're hungry, there's a buffet and red spirit wine over there. I'll come to you later. Li Daocheng couldn't ask for more. His stomach had been protesting for a long time. Okay, take your time. Then he went to the buffet table. However, the moment Li Daocheng turned sideways, Sinuo saw his whole profile clearly. She was slightly stunned and felt strange. She seemed to have seen him somewhere before. When Qiao Shima saw Sinuo staring at Li Daocheng with a strange expression, she mistakenly thought that Sinuo was curious about the fool. Fearing that she would stop Li Daocheng, Qiao Shima hurriedly pulled Sinuo to the other side of the banquet hall. Li Daocheng walked to the buffet table and was immediately attracted by the variety of food on the table. There were all kinds of flavors. Most of them were high-end spirit beast meat, such as fire salamander meat, iced jiao claws, thunder bear loin meat, and many spirit fruits. Li Daocheng picked up a large piece of thunder bear loin meat and stuffed it into his mouth. He ate 5 skewers in one breath, 3 vermilion spirit fruits in one bite, and an iced jiao rib in 2 or 3 bites. In just a few minutes, Li Daocheng wiped out all the food on the 5 plates in front of him. However, when he picked up a glazed fruit and took a bite, he found that many guests who came to attend the banquet were looking at him with disdain. Normally, Li Daocheng wouldn't care what they thought of him. What he ate was none of their business. However, today's occasion was special. Qiao Shima was his client, so he had to pay attention to his image. Li Daocheng glanced at the south side of the banquet hall, where there was an external balcony. There was no one there. Then he picked up a plate full of food and a glass of red spirit wine and went to the balcony. Naturally, 1 plate of food was not enough. Li Daocheng came back to take 2 more plates and went back to the balcony again. He was the only one enjoying the feast on the large balcony. How cool it was! These few plates of food were not something that ordinary people could eat casually. The Cloud Palace on the top floor of the cloud-piercing building was the top club in Tianyuan City. A casual meal for individual guests would cost at least 10 or 20,000. How could such a banquet be held? The spirit beast meat on the table was of high quality. A random Thunderbear loin skewer was worth several thousand yuan. Li Daocheng thought as he ate. And Xinua's birthday party was so extravagant. It was even grander than his own birthday party. The in-family strength was not below the Li family's. The price he charged for the middle-aged man's treatment last time was obviously too low. The food Li Daocheng had eaten was probably worth tens of thousands of yuan. Just as Li Daocheng was enjoying the delicious food and wine, the balcony door was pushed open and a disabled young man in a nimble wheelchair floated in. Li Daocheng's mouth was full of food. He glanced at the young man who suddenly appeared and continued to bury himself in the food. "Are you here to attend the banquet?" The disabled young man floated to the opposite side of Li Daocheng's table and asked. "Yes." Li Daocheng's mouth was full and he couldn't speak. He could only respond. "I heard that many grassroots cultivators, in order to eat good spirit beast meat to aid their cultivation, will sneak into the banquet when there are too many people. In fact, they don't know anyone at all and eat without paying. Don't you think this is very annoying?" The disabled young man looked at Li Daocheng with a smile and asked. "Yes." Li Daocheng answered vaguely with a mouth full of food. He wondered why the young man said this to him. This kind of person, no matter how much spirit beast meat he eats, it won't help his cultivation at all. Because there is a problem with his mind, everything he does will be a problem. Don't you think so? The disabled young man continued. Li Daocheng's mouth was as big as a baboon's, and he really couldn't speak. He gave a thumbs up to indicate that the disabled young man was right. "Then why are you still eating?" The disabled young man's face darkened, and his easygoing tone became angry. Li Daocheng continued to give a thumbs up and muttered vaguely, It's delicious." The disabled young man's hand on the edge of the table suddenly exerted force and pushed Li Daocheng. The disabled young man regretted it after he made a move. He used too much force this time. The kid opposite him looked like a little bastard who ate without paying. He was afraid that he would be crippled this time. Clang! The table flew out and hit the balcony railing. Li Daocheng got up and walked to the side with the plate in his hand. He was going to go in and add more food to continue eating. The disabled young man was stunned for a moment. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. This kid was lucky to have avoided it. Otherwise, something would have happened. The disabled young man only wanted to teach this dine-and-dash kid a lesson. He didn't really want to do anything to him. Looking at this guy's pale and weak appearance, the disabled young man changed his mind and didn't want to make a move. With a thought, an invisible wave of telekinesis blasted out. It wasn't easy to control the strength of his hand, mainly because he didn't know what this freeloader was capable of. If he used too much force and killed him, it would be troublesome. The disabled young man used telekinesis to attack. At least he could grasp the strength of the attack. This kind of strength could cause a cultivator below the 5th level of Qi refining to have a splitting headache. When they returned, they would have nightmares for a night. After a few days, they would slowly get better and wouldn't be harmed. In the disabled young man's opinion, this kind of punishment was enough. As soon as Li Daocheng walked away, the table he was sitting on flew out. He was confused, not knowing why the disabled young man suddenly pushed the table. He turned to look at him. Li Daocheng had just turned his face when a wave of telekinesis attacked him. However, this level of telekinesis attack was no different from nothing to him. However, this wave of telekinesis contained a faint aura of death and a strong murderous aura. This kind of murderous aura could only be possessed by people who had experienced cruel killing fields. This wave of telekinesis was not strong, but its penetrating power was very strong. It was the first time that Li Daocheng had been attacked by someone's telekinesis. He was a little curious and began to study this wave of telekinesis. Seeing Li Daocheng's expression suddenly freeze, and he stood still, The disabled young man's heart skipped a beat. Oh no, this kid's mental strength is too weak, isn't it? I've already reduced the strength of my telekinesis to a very low level. How did he become an idiot? Brother, what happened just now? And Shinua pushed open the balcony door and looked at Ding Bang and asked nervously. When she saw the smashed table and Li Daochong standing there motionlessly, and Shinua's heart jumped. Her brother had been in the army for several years. 2 years ago, he was injured by a malicious ghost on the frontline battlefield and was infected with miasma. His lower body was disabled, and his cultivation level plummeted. Since he was a child, his dream of destroying all the dark ghosts was shattered. After he came back, he began to study the path of cultivation, but his fiery temper had never changed. As long as he didn't like someone, he would definitely teach them a lesson. Last time, Ding Bang was ridiculed on Red Sun Planet for being disabled. He directly bombarded that person with his telekinesis, and his father spent a lot of money to settle it. Looking at Li Daochong's appearance, and Shinua's heart sank. Her good friend brought her fiancé to celebrate her birthday, but in the end, her fiancé became an idiot, and Shinua didn't dare to think about it. Chapter 47. Hearing Xiao Shima's voice, Shinua was a little overwhelmed. Sitting in the floating wheelchair, Ding Bang was dumbfounded. He didn't expect that he would get into trouble on impulse and turn Xiao Shima into an idiot. He immediately regretted it. Today was his sister's birthday party, which should have been a happy occasion, but he turned it into a crime scene. Ding Bang regretted it. Xiao Shima was eating for free. It was just a drop in the bucket for the Yin family. Why did he have to teach Xiao Shima a lesson? Thunder Bear Tenderloin is still the best. A sigh broke the silence on the balcony. Ding Bang, who was regretting, was stunned when he saw the young man suddenly move again. He licked his lips as if nothing had happened and turned to enter the banquet hall. Shinua didn't know what was going on. Seeing that Li Daochong was fine, he finally felt relieved. Anyway, it was good that nothing happened. When Li Daochong turned around, he met Shinua face to face, and their eyes met. Shinua's heart was lifted again, but this time it wasn't nervousness or worry, but excitement. "Divine Doctor, it's you," Shinua exclaimed. Li Daochong's heart skipped a beat. "Damn it, why didn't you stay in the banquet hall to receive everyone's blessings for your birthday? Why did you come to the balcony?" "Miss Shinua, I think you got the wrong person. I'm not a divine doctor. The profession of alchemy is too profound for me to learn." Li Daochong responded quickly. Besides, he wasn't a divine doctor. If it weren't for the hot-blooded upgrader, he wouldn't have been able to deal with the black resentment binding spirit in the middle-aged man's body. Li Daochong didn't want to be recognized. Li Daochong entered the banquet hall from the other side. Shinua was embarrassed. Did I get the wrong person? But how could there be two people who looked so similar in the world? Shinua, what happened outside just now? Xiao Shimo ran over and asked worriedly. Seeing Li Daochong coming in from the balcony, her heart skipped a beat. Did this guy cause any trouble? Nothing. The wind blew the table down. Shinua was comparing Li Daochong with a young miracle-working doctor he met in Zhixiao People's Hospital half a month ago in his memory, when Xiao Shima's voice suddenly came. He was startled and casually found an excuse to reply. Xiao Shima didn't believe it. She looked past Encino and saw that only one table had fallen. "Sino, isn't that your brother? The wind outside is so strong that even the table has been blown over. Let him in quickly," Xiao Shima said with concern. "All right." Shinua was a little absent-minded. After responding, he turned around and walked away without calling her brother. Seeing this, Xiao Shima's pretty face was filled with worry. Could it be that Li Daochong had a conflict with Sinuo's brother? Otherwise, why would Sinuo look so preoccupied that he didn't even hear what she said clearly? If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have brought this guy. Xiao Shima was filled with regret. She braced herself and called out to Ding Bang on the balcony. "Brother Ding Bang, it's windy outside. Come in. We'll be cutting the cake soon." After Li Daochong left as if nothing had happened, and Ding Bang was puzzled. He had been thinking about what went wrong with his telekinesis attack just now. However, after thinking about it, and Ding Bang confirmed that his telekinesis attack had indeed hit the other party. But why did the kid look like nothing had happened? A kindred spirit? A psychic cultivator? And Ding Bong's face showed a touch of excitement. He didn't expect to meet a master just by coming to Blue Bay, star to relax. And Ding Bang was thinking when he heard Xiao Shima calling him. He replied, "I'll be right there." Xiao Shima returned to the banquet hall, feeling uneasy. Just now, she saw that Ding Bang didn't look very good. Something must have happened. Just now, there was no third person on the balcony except for Li Daochong and Ding Bang. Xiao Shima didn't know what to do for a while. She felt guilty for messing up her friend's birthday and wanted to find a hole to hide in. Li Daochong entered the banquet hall and went straight to the buffet table. There was nothing in his eyes except for food. He didn't know the people at the banquet and had nothing to do. It was rare for him to have such a good spirit beast meal. It would be a waste if he didn't eat it. Li Daochong's appetite had increased recently. His stomach was like a bottomless pit. No matter how much he ate, it could be digested and turned into the energy his body needed. The feces and urine he excreted were extremely smelly. His body seemed to be quietly changing, extracting the essence and removing the dregs. Li Daochong picked up his favorite Thunder Bear tenderloin and ate while choosing other food. From time to time, he would take a sip of red spirit wine, which tasted soft and refreshing. Li Daochong was eating when someone called him. He turned his head and saw that it was Shina. Damn it. Li Daochong's forehead creased. What's this girl doing? Throwing away John Huan Yo? Startled? Blink? Page dizziness? Stop? Ents moaning? Thinking slowly. Missin, what's the matter? Did you go to Zixiao People's Hospital half a month ago? No. Li Daochong focused on the food in front of him and didn't even think about it. Are you sure? And Xinhua asked. Li Daochong saw that Xinhua wanted to get to the bottom of the matter and was afraid of her. So he changed the topic and asked, Yes, Missin. The food you arranged for this birthday banquet is really good. Can I take some with me later? Just take it. I'll ask the chef to make some more for you later. Have you spent the last 100,000 yuan? And Xinhua said lightly. She had been staring at Li Daochong. The young man she saw last time left a deep impression on her. She couldn't be wrong, unless there were two people who looked exactly the same in the world. Even if there were, the feeling of people would still be different. Li Daochong's feeling at this time was exactly the same as the young man she saw last time. She was absolutely not wrong, and Xinhua was very sure of her judgment. Spent early? What 100,000 yuan? Missin, I don't understand. Li Daochong, who picked up another piece of fire element fruit and took a bite, almost blurted it out inadvertently. He squinted at Xinhua. Damn it, this girl is so cunning. She actually tricked me. And Xinhua's eyes flashed with a trace of slyness. Li Daochong changed his words in time, but the two words he blurted out were still heard by Xinhua. You are the miracle working doctor, right? And Xinhua didn't give up. Missin, I don't know what you're talking about. I am really not a miracle working doctor. Thank you for thinking so highly of me. Today is your birthday. You should happily accept the blessings and gift from your friends. Don't think too much. There are only pharmacists in the world. At most, you can only be a chief pharmacist. There is no miracle-working doctor. Li Daochong was determined not to admit it. I can't be wrong. Miracle-working doctor, are you unwilling to reveal your identity? It doesn't matter. My father and I just want to thank you. We will never publicize it. And Xinhua promised, looking at Li Daochong with a pair of big eyes earnestly. She stayed in Blue Bay Star and didn't leave, because she was looking for the miracle-working doctor. In addition to her father, there were several people in her family who had the same disease. Ding Bang also had problems recently, so it was useless to check up on him. Li Daochong smiled bitterly in his heart. This girl was not easy to fool. Missin, I'm really not. Li Daochong was ready to walk away. You are. And Xinhua reached out and grabbed Li Daochong, not letting him go. These days, she had used a lot of her connections and spent a lot of money just to find that young man. Now that he was in front of her, she couldn't let him go no matter what. Missin, men and women shouldn't touch each other. I'm your good friend's fiancé. Mind your image. Li Daochong pushed Xinhua. The two of them pulled and pulled, which immediately attracted the attention of others. As the absolute protagonist today, and Xinhua naturally attracted a lot of attention. Xinhua, is this person harassing you? Do you need me to drive him away? Wang Su had already noticed this. When he saw Xinhua being pushed, he immediately came to rescue her. Wang Su was from one of the four major families in Blue Bay Star. The Wang family was close to the main branch and had some power. He was mainly responsible for the business dealings between the Wang family and the family on Red Sun Star. He was one of the many suitors of Xinhua and also one of the few who felt the best about himself. He thought that with the Wang family backing him, his conditions were many times better than others. Regardless of his background, Wang Su's strength was not weak. At the age of 23, he had already reached the 9th level of qi refinement. What harassment? Wang Su, please mind your words. He's my friend. Believe it or not, I'll drive you away. And Xinhua had finally found the miracle doctor and was counting on him to save her family. Suddenly, someone came to criticize the miracle doctor. She immediately felt uncomfortable. She was afraid that Li Daochong would be unhappy, so she immediately retorted. Wang Su looked at Li Daochong with an awkward and surprised expression. This guy was dressed shabbily and didn't even have a Dharma robe. Was he in Xinhua's friend? He wanted to be the hero to save the beauty, but he made a mistake. Chapter 48. Wang Su was from one of the four major families of Blue Bay Star. The Wang family was relatively close to the main branch and had some power. He was mainly responsible for the business dealings between the Wang family and the family of Red Sun Star. He was one of the many suitors of Xinhua. He thought that he had the support of the Wang family and felt very good about himself. Regardless of his background, Wang Su's strength was not weak. He was 23 years old and had reached the 9th level of qi refining. What harassment? Wang Su, please mind your words. He is my friend. Believe it or not, I will drive you away. And Xinhua finally found the miracle doctor and was counting on him to save her family. Suddenly, someone came up to criticize the miracle doctor. She immediately felt uncomfortable and was afraid that Li Daochong would be unhappy, so she immediately retorted. Wang Su looked embarrassed and looked at Li Daochong in surprise. This guy was dressed shabbily and didn't even have a Dharma robe, but he was Xinhua's friend? He wanted to be the hero to save the damsel in distress and please Xinhua, but he made a mistake. It turns out to be a friend. Sorry, I was rude. Hello, my name is Wang Su, the external business manager of the Wang family, one of the four major families of Blue Bay Star. May I know which family this friend is from? Wang Su was not angry after being rebuked by Xinhua. He immediately greeted Li Daochong and introduced himself in a very superior way. He even emphasized the words, Wang family, for fear that the other party could not hear him. Wang Su looked at Li Daochong with an incomparably superior smile on his face. Everyone in Blue Bay Star knew the name of the Wang family. As long as he said his name, everyone would try to curry favor with him. Wang Su waited for the other party to flatter him. He had seen this kind of scene too many times. Some people couldn't wait to call him father on the spot. Li Daochong acted as if he didn't hear Wang Su's words at all. He pushed Xinhua away, picked up a plate of spirit beast meat and a glass of red spirit wine from the table, and went straight to the corner. Wang Su's face twitched twice, and his eyes turned cold. What the hell? How dare he show off in front of me? Wang Su looked coldly at the leaving Li Daochong, and then turned his eyes to Xinhua. Xinhua, can I invite you to dance later? And Xinhua didn't even look at Wang Su and chased after Li Daochong and replied impatiently, Go away, don't bother me. A basin of cold water drenched him from head to toe. Wang Su stood there like an idiot. Li Daochong sat down and began to enjoy the food. Li Daochong, I can't be wrong. It was you at the Zixiao People's Hospital last time. Encino caught up with Li Daochong. Li Daochong was afraid of Xinhua's relentless pursuit. If this continued, he would become the center of attention. Missin, if you say so, then so be it. Is this okay? Li Daochong said reluctantly. I knew I was right. Dr. Li, thank you for curing my father last time. After the banquet is over, can you take a look at my brother again? He has a similar disease as my father. Encino asked Li Tianlan with joy on his face. Li Daocheng wanted to refuse, but when he saw several guests coming this way, he said in a low voice, "Missin, see you after the banquet. Now, can you please don't disturb me while I eat?" Seeing Li Daocheng finally admit it, and Xinhua smiled triumphantly and turned away. Li Daocheng shook his head helplessly, picked up the ice dragon ribs, and began to eat. After finishing the food in his hand, Li Daocheng drank up the red spirit wine. When he was about to get up and get some more food, he saw Zhang Honglai talking to a man in a low voice in the other corner. This guy also came to the banquet? Enemies often cross paths. Li Daocheng's expression changed. He used his telekinesis to cover Zhang Honglai and quietly listened to what he was saying. "Young Master Zhang, as long as Qiao Shima drinks this glass of red wine, she will be at your mercy. Today, most of the powerful family juniors in Tianyuan City will be present. When Xiao Shima announces the annulment of her engagement with Li Daocheng in public, it will be impossible to take back what you said." The man smiled obscenely. "Is the puppet pill really so magical?" Zhang Honglai asked suspiciously. Of course, of course. This is the masterpiece of the old man of thunder and fire in the underground city. One pill is worth 500,000 yuan, and it can be produced in 3 months. As soon as it comes out of the furnace, people will rush to get it. Needless to say, the effect will last for a day and a night. After Qiao Shima announces the engagement, you can take her wherever you want. As long as the rice is cooked, she will be your woman in life and your ghost in death. Even if she wakes up, there is nothing she can do. Li Daocheng, that fool, you don't have to care about him." The man's obscene smile became more intense. The two talked directly in a very low voice. The man also used his robe to support an invisible sound barrier. Even if a Qi gathering stage cultivator stood beside them and pricked up their ears to listen, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. Zhang Honglai had always been cautious, but he would never dream that their conversation would be heard clearly by Li Daocheng, who had super telekinesis. Li Daocheng frowned. Zhang Honglai was really willing to do anything to get Qiao Shima. Li Daocheng did not have much feelings for Qiao Shima. He only agreed to the fake marriage for the sake of money. As for Qiao Shima's safety, Li Daocheng was not very concerned about it. However, Zhang Honglai had caused trouble for Li Daocheng and the people around him many times. He had even tried to kill them. Li Daocheng would not let this matter rest. Li Daocheng did not know what Zhang Honglai wanted to do, but since he knew, he would not let him succeed. Besides, if something really happened to Qiao Shima and they could not consummate the marriage, then he would not be able to get the rest of the money. 100,000 Federation coins was fine, but 80 spirit stones were good stuff. Whether it was for business or personal reasons, Li Daocheng had to help Qiao Shima this time. Zhang Honglai and the man exchanged a few more words before they separated. Zhang Honglai went straight to Qiao Shima, who was chatting with a few girls. Li Daocheng put down the plate in his hand and quickly walked over. He looked coldly at the 2 wine glasses in Zhang Honglai's hands. He did not know which one had dissolved the doll pill. "Shima, long time no see." Zhang Honglai elegantly walked to the girls and greeted Qiao Shima while nodding to the others. The girls looked at Qiao Shima enviously. One of the girls nudged Qiao Shima and said, "Shima, you are so popular. In such a short time, 3 young masters have taken the initiative to greet you. They only have eyes for a beauty like you and don't even look at us. It's so sad." "Yes, it's so sad. Shima, you have such good conditions. Of all the people you could marry, why did you choose a fool in the end? If his father was still a Jindan cultivator, it would be fine. But now that he has been crippled, you still want to marry that fool Li Daocheng. Are you confused?" Another red-haired girl jeered. "Go away, don't mention it. Shima, don't pay attention to them. Hurry up and introduce us to this tall and strong young master." The last girl in yellow Taoist robes saw that Qiao Shima was embarrassed and rolled her eyes at the other 2 girls. Qiao Shima glared at the red-haired girl, but she couldn't do anything about this girl's blabbermouth. She then introduced, "He is the first heir of the Zhang family in Dongcheng, Zhang Honglai. My uncle and his father are close friends. We have known each other since we were young." "Oh, so you two are childhood sweethearts. The girls deliberately showed an expression of sudden realization. Zhang Honglai had an expression of enjoyment and said with a smile, Shima often mentions you two in front of me. I will treat you to a soak in the spirit spring some other day. Wow, a soak in the spirit spring of Ling Shao Mountain cost tens of thousands of yuan. Young Master Zhan is so generous. I think you two are more compatible. The red-haired girl with blabbermouth said loudly. Shaoling, lower your voice. Shima's fiancé is here today. It won't be good if he hears, the yellow-clothed girl reminded. Let him come. It's good that he hears. I feel bad for Shima, so what? The red-haired girl called Shaoling said indignantly. Shima, this friend of yours is full of energy. Chapter 49. Do you want to die? Who are you? Why are you standing behind me, so quietly? The sudden voice startled Shaoling. She patted her chest and exclaimed. Shaoling turned around and saw a fair-skinned young man in simple clothes standing behind her. His appearance was not bad, but he looked like a poor boy. Shaoling was about to get angry. The girl in yellow hurriedly pulled Shaoling back and whispered, He's Shima's fiancé. Shaoling froze for a moment and then rolled her eyes at Li Daochong. She said indifferently, Stupid people do stupid things. This old mother won't argue with you. Li Daochong smiled and nodded with a serious face. And you're old enough. Uffed. The girls beside them couldn't help but laugh. They were usually scolded by Shaoling and were secretly pleased to see her being scolded. When Shaoling heard this, she immediately exploded. She glared at Li Daochong. Who are you calling old? Li Daochong didn't look at Shaoling. He raised his eyebrows and said, Whoever is the old mother is old. Shaoling trembled with anger and turned to look at Xiao Shima. Shima, how can you be with this kind of person? Zhan Honglai saw that Li Daochong had a conflict with Xiao Shima's good friend in public. He was happy in his heart and looked at Li Daochong with a disdainful smile. Li Daochong's initiative to come over had already left Xiao Shima at a loss. She didn't intend to introduce Li Daochong to these good friends, especially Shaoling. This girl was straightforward and wasn't a bad person, but she had been spoiled since childhood and had a late stage of princess syndrome. Her father was also a chi-gathering cultivator, so she was used to being arrogant and didn't give in to anyone, especially that mouth of hers, which was more poisonous than snakes and scorpions. Xiao Shima was afraid that Li Daochong didn't know how to speak and would have a conflict with her good friend. What she feared would happen. Xiao Shima frowned. She didn't know how much she regretted bringing Li Daochong to the birthday party. However, Xiao Shima had already taken over the family business and majored in foreign trade, so she knew how to deal with this kind of deadlock. Xiao Shima was about to speak when Zhan Honglai, who had been watching the show, said, We're all here to attend someone else's birthday party. Don't hurt each other. Let's all talk. Come, let's have a drink. As he spoke, Zhan Honglai waved at a waiter who was carrying a tray. The waiter walked over with a few glasses of red wine. Shima, look at young Master Zhan. Some people really can't compare with his demeanor. You can tell who's the white horse and who's the toad at a glance. Shaoling had just suffered a loss in words. Naturally, she wasn't convinced and wanted to turn the tables no matter what. Xiao Shima frowned and pretended not to hear. If she had to choose between Zhan Honglai and Li Daochong, she would definitely choose Li Daochong. She wouldn't choose Zhan Honglai because she knew the latter's glorious deeds very well. Li Daochong was harmless no matter what. He was just a little stupid. Zhan Honglai was different. Who knew how many girls had been ruined by his hands? On the surface, Xiao Shima was still very friendly with Zhan Honglai. After all, the Qiao family relied on the Zhan family for a lot of business. Since Zhan Honglai had spoken, the other girls followed suit. They didn't want to make things difficult for Xiao Shima. One by one, they picked up their wine glasses and became peacemakers. Zhan Honglai handed one of the 2 glasses of red spirit wine he had been holding to Xiao Shima. The latter didn't think much about it and directly took it in her hand. Li Daochong's eyes, which had been smiling faintly, showed a trace of difficulty. If he pointed out the problem with the wine in public, not only would no one believe him, but he would also alert the enemy. Zhan Honglai would definitely be suspicious of him. When he talked to the man, he used a sound barrier and spoke very softly. How would he know? Last time, in order to save Li Qingyao, Li Daocheng had actually revealed some of his strength. Zhang Honglai must have known from Zhang Xiaocheng. However, because of Li Tianyang's return, Li Daocheng did something to the four people after knocking them out. When they woke up, they would mistakenly think that there was an expert hiding in the dark to help Li Daocheng. With Zhang Honglie's arrogant personality, he definitely wouldn't think that the four people were defeated by Li Daocheng. He would definitely think that the expert hiding in the dark was Li Tianyang. However, breaking the sound barrier was a completely different matter. It was impossible to do it without the strength of a late-stage qi-gathering cultivator. The current Li Tianyang also couldn't do it. Li Daocheng didn't want to reveal any of his trump cards, at least not before the end of the term test. Otherwise, if Zhang Honglai really wanted to fight to the death, he wouldn't be able to resist with his current strength. Moreover, the man who talked to Zhang Honglai just now said that the doll pill was colorless, tasteless, and non-toxic when dissolved in the wine. It couldn't be detected by the test. This thing would only work if it reacted with something in the body. Otherwise, it was no different from alcohol. If he really said it in public, Zhang Honglai was so sinister, he would definitely act according to the situation and say that he framed him. Li Daocheng thought about it and could only think of one way, which was to knock over Qiao Shima's wine glass. Come, everyone. Let's toast to Miss Anne's happy birthday. The girl in yellow raised her glass. Yes, happy birthday to Miss and cheers. Another girl followed. Everyone raised their glasses. Zhang Honglai narrowed his eyes and looked at Qiao Shima. As long as she drank this glass of wine, this birthday party would become a prelude to his wedding night, and Li Daocheng would become the biggest joke in this prelude. Wait a minute. Just then, Li Daocheng suddenly shouted to stop. The girls who raised their glasses looked at Li Daocheng in confusion. Qiao Shima was the same. She couldn't help but frown. She had just calmed down the conflict between him and Shaoling. What was this guy up to again? She couldn't help but feel nervous. Under everyone's confused gaze, Li Daocheng turned to look at Qiao Shima, raised his glass, and said, Shima, thank you for marrying me. Here's a toast to you. Qiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng in a daze. She didn't know what this guy was up to. Others might not know about the fake marriage, but the two of them had agreed beforehand. What did he mean by that? Shima, don't you want to drink with me? Li Daocheng smiled. This scene made Zhang Honglai burn with jealousy. He gnashed his teeth and wanted to rush up and tear Li Daocheng apart. But soon, Zhang Honglai's anger calmed down. He smiled coldly. Stupid boy, I'll let you be smug for a while. Come on, drink this glass of wine. Let's see how you'll be smug then. Qiao Shima was stunned for a moment, but quickly recovered. No matter what this guy was up to, it was good to put on such a show in front of so many people. Just now, she also noticed that several of the Li family's juniors who came to attend the party were looking at her. After Qiao Shima and Li Daocheng's marriage was announced, there were people following her around these days. The Li family obviously didn't believe that she could really marry Li Daocheng. Okay. Qiao Shima smiled and raised her glass. Is this guy stupid? Why can't I see it? How could a fool do something so romantic? Some of the girls whispered. So romantic. If someone said something like that to me in front of everyone, it would be worth it to marry him, another girl said. Clang, clang. The sound of wine glasses colliding came to an abrupt stop before the crisp sound could spread out. Then came the discordant sound of shattering. The glass of wine shattered. Pretend I didn't say anything. This guy is really stupid. The girl who had spoken enviously just now looked at him with disdain. Qiao Shima looked at the shattered glass in her hand and the red spirit wine that spilled all over her hand. She sighed inwardly. She had overestimated Li Daocheng. What kind of broken glass is this? It's so fragile. I didn't even use any strength and it shattered. Shima, I'm sorry. Is your hand okay? Let me help you wipe it. Li Daocheng made a fuss about nothing. He hurriedly took the broken glass from Qiao Shima's hand and helped her wipe it. No need. I'll do it myself. Qiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng as if she was looking at a god of plague, but she couldn't avoid him. The Li family was looking at her. You? Zhang Honglai's heart exploded. He spat out a word, but he held it back. He wanted to shout, but couldn't. 500,000 was gone just like that. Zhang Honglai felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His heart was bleeding. Losing money was a small matter, but his well-laid plan was ruined by an idiot just like that. Why did you have to use so much strength when you knocked glasses? Stupid C***, N.T. Zhang Honglai cursed in his heart. Young Master Zhang, your wine spilled. Xiaoling saw that Zhang Honglai's hand was trembling nonstop. The wine in the glass in his hand spilled out. Stupid C***, N.T. Zhang Honglai was burning with anger. He blurted out the last two words. Chapter 50. The girls standing beside Hua Xiaoling all looked at them strangely. Zhang Honglai suddenly cursed at Hua Xiaoling. His previously elegant face now had a ferocious expression. It was frightening. Zhang Honglai was burning with anger, but he had nowhere to vent it. He coldly looked at Hua Xiaoling, who was ashamed and angry, and turned to leave without saying anything. Stop. Speak clearly before you leave. Who are you cursing at? Xiaoling was so angry that she grabbed Zhang Honglai. She had given him a kind reminder, but he had called her an idiot. Anyone would be angry. Zhang Honglai was already furious. Now that Hua Xiaoling was grabbing his clothes like a shrew, he was about to use his internal energy to shake Hua Xiaoling away. He turned his head and saw Li Daochong wiping Xiao Shima's hand. His jealousy immediately rose. Zhang Honglai's face was ashen. He moved his body, and a burst of internal energy shot out. Hua Xiaoling felt her wrist go numb as a strong internal energy hit her. Hua Xiaoling, who was only at the 5th level of qi refining, was directly shaken and sent flying towards Li Daochong. Li Daochong's eyes moved slightly. He reached out and grabbed Hua Xiaoling by the waist, then took 3 steps back to disperse the internal energy. Li Daochong frowned. Not only was the internal energy vigorous, it also had a stacking effect. Even though his strength had increased by so much, it was still difficult for him to withstand it. Without waiting for Li Daochong to stand firm, Zhang Honglai flicked his hand, and a very weak internal energy hit Li Daochong's leg. Zhang Honglai didn't dare to use too much strength. There were many experts among the guests at the banquet. If he used too much internal energy, he would be discovered. If not, he would definitely break Li Daochong's leg. But then he would be exposed. Thud! Li Daochong lost his balance and fell to the ground with Hua Xiaoling in his arms. In order to prevent Hua Xiaoling from falling directly on top of him, Li Daochong used both of his hands to support her. One of his hands touched something soft, and he pushed Hua Xiaoling, who had lost her balance, to the ground. Hua Xiaoling sat on Li Daochong's thigh. Hua Xiaoling was shocked. Her wrist was numb. She didn't expect Zhang Honglai's spiritual energy to be so profound. Just now, she thought that not only would she fall flat on her face in front of everyone, but she would also suffer internal injuries. Hua Xiaoling sat on Li Daochong's lap. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with embarrassment. She had just called him a toad, but in the blink of an eye, she had been kicked away by a horse's hooves. The toad had saved her. "Excuse me, can you get down now?" Li Daochong's calm voice came from under Hua Xiaoling. Hua Xiaoling's face turned red. She wanted to get up, but the blood in her body was boiling. She didn't have the strength to speak even if she wanted to. "Miss Hua, are you all right?" Zhang Honglai hid the anger on his face and walked forward to greet her. Then, he reached out to help Hua Xiaoling up. Hua Xiaoling didn't have the strength to fight back at all. She could only let Zhang Honglai do whatever he wanted. Li Daochong stood up as well. Because of the commotion, it attracted the attention of many guests. Zhang Honglai helped Hua Xiaoling up and pushed her to the side. He hid the anger on his face and said shamelessly, "Li Daochong, Miss Hua only said a few words to you. Did you have to throw her to the ground like that?" Li Daochong brushed the dust off his body and sneered. "Are you blind? Did you see me throw her to the ground?" Li Daochong had already achieved his goal of ruining Zhang Honglai's plan. He didn't want to have a direct confrontation with Zhang Honglai on such an occasion. But this brat was too much of a bully. He just had to make things difficult for him, and kept pushing him step by step. Li Daochong wasn't afraid of Zhang Honglai. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't want to expose himself too much before the end-of-semester exam and his family's influence, he would have been nothing in front of Li Daocheng. Zhang Honglai was one of the top 3 elites in Xiansong University's first-year elite class. He was only one step away from the elite class. Everyone in the elite class had to flatter him and act according to his wishes. However, he had never expected to be called blind by a fool who had been abandoned by his family. Coupled with his previous jealousy, he couldn't control his anger anymore. "You're a piece of trash who doesn't even have a spiritual pulse. You're courting death," Zhang Honglai said as he raised his hand and slapped Li Daocheng's cheek. The girls standing beside the two of them cried out in surprise. "Zhang Honglai, stop it," Qiao Shima shouted. Zhang Honglai, who had long since lost his head in anger, wouldn't listen. Zhang Honglia's slap was full of strength. He wanted nothing more than to make Li Daocheng's head spin. However, the moment Zhang Honglai raised his hand, Li Daocheng instinctively took a step back. He had practiced the basic skills to the point of perfection. Every day, he would fight that witch, Chu Qianyue, in close combat. If he didn't have the strength to crush Li Daocheng, any move he made would be in slow motion. Li Daocheng's step back was just enough to avoid Zhang Honglia's slap. When his fingertip brushed past Li Daocheng's face, it was less than an inch away from the tip of his nose. Li Daocheng flicked his finger, and a weak force hit Zhang Honglia's elbow. The latter part of his arm that had been swung around stiffened. "Pah!" Zhang Honglai slapped himself in the face. Just when everyone thought that Li Daocheng would be slapped in public by Zhang Honglai, the latter slapped himself in the face. What happened? Everyone's face showed a confused expression. The entire banquet hall quieted down in an instant. At that moment, it was as if time had stopped. For at least 2 seconds, there was no sound. Xiao Shima, who was standing beside Li Daocheng, turned her face away and didn't want to look. Now that she turned her face, she didn't know what had happened. Zhang Honglai didn't know what had happened either. A 5-finger mark quickly appeared on his face. "Stinking brat, you dare to trick me." Zhang Honglai completely exploded. He raised his fist and punched out. Bzzz. The speed of the punch was swift and violent. The air was compressed in an instant and made a muffled sound. How did that fool provoke Zhang Honglai? If it was before, it would have been fine. At least he had Li Tianyang behind him. Now that Li Tianyang is crippled, isn't that fool courting death by fighting with Zhang Honglai? If this punch lands, Li Daocheng will lose half his life. Whoosh! Zhang Honglai saw that his fist was about to land on Li Daocheng's face, but his opponent suddenly disappeared. Everyone else looked at Li Daocheng, who had suddenly squatted down with astonishment. Everyone thought of the same word: cover your head and run away like a rat. This time, Qiao Shima endured the discomfort and watched. But when she saw Li Daocheng squat down with his head in his hands, her beautiful face twitched slightly. Rather than dodging like this, she would rather be punched. Bang! Just as everyone despised Li Daocheng for dodging because he was obviously frightened, a muffled sound was heard. Li Daocheng suddenly stood up, and his head slammed into Zhang Honglia's chin. The latter groaned, and his central nervous system went numb for a moment. He fell on his back. Behind him, a waiter happened to pass by and was knocked over. The wine glasses on the tray in his hand all spilled onto Zhang Honglia's body. The banquet hall was silent. How was this possible? Everyone looked at Zhang Honglai, who had fallen to the ground in a sorry state, in shock. Looking at the ceiling, Zhang Honglia's face was as stiff as a dead man's. He let the wine flow on his face. Only his eyes were filled with disbelief, incomprehension, and anger. Not far away, several of Zhang Honglia's accomplices were stunned. They were all core members of the Green Wolf Society of Xiansong University. Because their families had dealings with the infamily, they were invited to Xinua's birthday party. At this time, they saw that their boss was knocked down to the ground by that fool Li Daocheng. They couldn't accept it. One of the club members couldn't stand it anymore. He was about to help Zhang Honglai when he saw the side door of the banquet hall open. Zhang Jintian walked out with a gloomy face. He immediately stopped and stood still. Li Daocheng knocked down Zhang Honglai, but the people around him looked at him sympathetically. That silly kid is done for. Jean Honlier's momentum is different. He's going to be serious. Of course he's going to be serious. He was so embarrassed by a silly boy in public. It would be strange if he didn't go crazy. If I were Li Daochong, I would run away now. Before the discussion around had died down, the air around Jean Honglai, who was lying on his back, surged, and a wave of air blew against his face. Jean Honglai slowly straightened up from the ground with the support of air. The expression on his face was less angry and more crazy. Jean Honglai has already cultivated the floating air. How is it possible? Didn't he just break through to the 7th level of qi refining? Amazing. At this time, everyone was looking at Jean Honglai, who was ready to fight. No one paid attention to Li Daochong, and the latter didn't seem to have changed. In fact, Li Daochong's spirit qi was also surging out of his body. It was just that it was accumulating in his body and not being released. Every spirit vein in his body was beating violently. One of his spirit veins was tightly compressed. As long as Jean Honglai made a move, Li Daochong would give him an unforgettable response. The two looked at each other. Jean Honglier's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then he exerted force on his feet and was about to rush out. Chapter 51. Jean Honglai was just about to charge forward when an invisible pressure enveloped him and hit his sea of consciousness, making him unable to move. Just when everyone thought that Jean Honglai was about to erupt with a tsunami-like attack to kill Li Daochong, he stood motionless in place. Many of the onlookers who wished for the world to be in chaos felt suffocated in their hearts. It was as if there was a foul air in their stomach flowing down their intestines, unimpeded all the way to the door. Just as it was about to be released, it suddenly shrank back. It went back again. Why isn't young Master Jean moving? Go fight. Some of the guests couldn't help but shout softly. Quiet, what's the point of fighting? Don't you see Jean Jintian and Ding Bang coming over? A friend beside that person pulled him back. The person who shouted turned around and saw Jean Jintian and Ding Bang coming over from the other side of the banquet hall. Both of them had different expressions. Jean Jintian's eyes were like torches. Every step he took was silent, as if he didn't step on the ground at all. Ding Bang's agile wheelchair floated steadily, as if it was fixed on a track, without a trace of sway. Liar, what's going on? When Jean Jintian came out from the side door, he saw his son and Li Daochong in conflict. In fact, Jean Jintian saw the whole process, but he didn't want to intervene at first. That year, Li Tianyang reprimanded Jean Jintian in public, making him unable to back down. However, due to Li Tianyang's powerful strength, Jean Jintian didn't even dare to fart at that time, which made him take it to heart. Every dog has its day. Now that Li Tianyang's cultivation was lost, his family didn't care about him, and even his position in the army was dismissed. He was nothing. Naturally, Jean Jintian wouldn't let go of the humiliation of that year. His son bullying Li Tianyang's son. Jean Jintian felt good just thinking about it. However, Jean Honglai didn't live up to expectations. In the first round, not only did he fail to beat Li Daochong, he fell down in public and was battered and exhausted. Jean Jintian scolded his son from head to toe, his heart. This little bastard was too disappointing. How many times had he told him not to underestimate anyone? But this little bastard just wouldn't listen. In this way, it was even more impossible for Jean Honglai to intervene. Just now, Li Daochong had accidentally knocked down Jean Honglai. Anyone who saw it would know that it was pure luck. Of course, Jean Honglai was also careless. However, Jean Jintian, this old fox, was extremely good at judging the situation. Seeing Ding Ping Bang suddenly appear from the other side and head toward Jean Honglai and Li Daochong, he knew that it would be inexcusable if he didn't show up. Jean Jintian was originally one step behind in Ding Bang, but he had already asked before he arrived. He wanted to seize the initiative, so naturally, he wanted his son to speak first. Daddy. Jean Honglier's invisible pressure dissipated a lot. He immediately replied to his father. However, He was interrupted by Ding Bang before he could finish his sentence. Brotherly, you can't eat a good meal today. I'll give you more in a while. And Ding Bang didn't even look at Zhan Honglai as he drifted in front of Li Daochong. As for why the conflict happened, he didn't care at all. After the incident on the balcony, and Ding Bang already had the intention of befriending Li Daochong. To be able to withstand 20% of his killing intent and act as if nothing had happened, it was absolutely impossible to do so without some ability. And Ding Bong's lower limbs were now disabled, and he was wholeheartedly focused on cultivating. There were very few cultivators in the first place, so he always had a good impression of people who cultivated the same path. However, it was just a little good impression, and it was not enough for Ding Bang to ignore the Zhan family for Li Daochong. 1/3 of the family's business in Blue Bay Star was related to the Zhan family. This relationship was still quite solid. However, just now, and Xinhua called in Ding Bang to the second floor of the banquet hall and told him that Li Daochong was the young genius doctor who treated his father in the Purple Cloud People's Hospital last time. And Ding Bang was immediately surprised. No wonder Li Daochong could easily resolve the killing intent he was proud of. It turned out that he was the direct disciple of a mysterious alchemist. Although his father had already asked Wang Qinggu, the president of the Purple Cloud People's Hospital, and learned that senior Wang Qinggu didn't have any direct disciples, but he could cure his father's terminal illness at such a young age using ancient medical skills. He must be the disciple of a reclusive star-level alchemist. And Ding Bang already had a good impression of Li Daochong. After learning that Li Daochong saved his father's life, he couldn't wait to become sworn brothers with Li Daochong. No matter how big the business scope of the Zhan family and the Yin family was, it was not worth mentioning compared to the life-saving grace. And Ding Bang came downstairs to look for Li Daochong. As soon as he came down, he saw Zhan Honglai and Li Daochong having a conflict. If it weren't for the fact that the Zhan family was willing to take a small share of the business over the years, and Ding Bang wouldn't have just used his psychic pressure to cover Zhan Honglai, he would have definitely blasted him into a fool with his killing intent. Eating for free doesn't taste good. Li Daochong smiled. Only Ding Bang and Li Daochong knew this joke. In the ears of others, they only felt that Li Daochong's words were inexplicable and silly. What did he mean by eating for free doesn't taste good? Who would attend someone else's birthday party and say that they were here to eat for free? Wasn't this stupid? Impudent. Li Daochong, do you know how to speak? What do you mean by eating for free doesn't taste good? Are you here to eat for free? Zhan Honglai heard Li Daochong speak rudely to Ding Bang and immediately seized the opportunity to scold him. And Ding Bang's face turned cold. He turned to look at Zhan Jintian. He's your son. Zhan Honglai thought that Ding Bang didn't recognize him and hurriedly said, Director, and we met once at the Hongchuan mine last time. Slap. A loud and clear sound rang out. Before Zhan Honglai could finish speaking, he was slapped hard on the face. Dad, why did you hit me? Zhan Honglai was stunned. He covered his face and asked in horror. Slap. Zhan Honglai slapped him again. This time, it was extremely heavy. Zhan Honglai almost fell to the ground from the slap. Blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. After the two slaps, Zhan Jintian said to Ding Bang, Director, and it's my fault for not teaching my son well. I've embarrassed myself in front of you. He raised his hand and was about to slap him again. Brother Zhan, family matters are family matters. Remember to send the money to the transportation shuttle on time tomorrow. And Ding Bang said indifferently. Only then did Zhan Jintian put down his hand and angrily stared at Zhan Honglai. When he looked at Ding Bang, he immediately put on a smile and said, Director, I'll go back and make arrangements. I'll definitely send it on time tomorrow. And Ding Bang nodded and said, I still have guests to entertain, so I won't see you out. Director, you're busy. Zhan Jintian said politely and turned to leave. When he passed by Zhan Honglai, he said in a low voice, Bastard, why aren't you leaving? Zhan Honglai was slapped twice by Zhan Jintian in public. He was completely stunned. Only now did he regain his senses and follow Zhan Jintian out of the banquet hall. Just as he stepped out of the door, Zhan Jintian slapped Zhan Honglai on the back of his head, causing the latter to stagger and fall to the ground. Zhang Honglai had never seen his father so angry. One had to know that in the past, when something big happened, he would at most be confined and would rarely make a move. Zhang Jintian stared at Zhang Honglai in disappointment. Brat, did you eat so much that your nose went up your nose? Didn't you hear that in Dingbang had a deep relationship with Li Daochong? You actually thought you were smart and scolded Li Daochong in front of Dingbang? The business that I've worked so hard to expand over the years was almost destroyed by a little bastard like you. Zhang Honglai didn't say anything. Just now, he had been blinded by jealousy. Other than anger, there was nothing else in his mind. He was only thinking about how to get rid of Li Daochong. Zhang Jintian grabbed Zhang Honglia's hair and threw him into a luxurious floating car at the entrance. He also followed in. The driver had been waiting quietly. Seeing that the father and son were seated, he immediately started the car and flew away. Half an hour later, in the basement of the Zhang estate's backyard, Zhang Honglai was tied up and soaked in boiling water, enduring the torture of boiling water. He had to protect his body with spirit qi at all times. Once he relaxed, the burning pain would spread throughout his body. A large man was expressionlessly adding firewood below. Zhang Jintian sat on an armchair and sipped from a cup of tea as he said, "Liar, you have extraordinary talent. You broke through to the 7th level of the Qi refinement realm at the age of 18. Our Zhang family's proudest mental cultivation method, see collapse art. You didn't spend much effort to cultivate to the 4th level. When I was your age, I only cultivated to the 2nd level. But you're playful by nature and have no resistance to women. You're ruthless and have inferior strategies. You're infatuated with a mere Qiao Shima and lost your mind for a woman. You disappoint me." Zhang Honglai stood in the boiling water. His entire body was red. Even with spirit qi, he couldn't completely resist the corrosion of the boiling water. "Dad, I can't take it anymore." Zhang Jintian looked expressionlessly at Zhang Honglai, who was about to be cooked by the boiling water. "You can't take a pot of boiling water? Then why are you still cultivating? You can't even compare to a third-rate soldier on the Federation's frontline battlefield. I don't have a son like you." With that, Zhang Jintian stood up and left. Zhang Honglai let out a heart-wrenching roar. Boom! The boiling water exploded. Zhang Honglia's aura burst out like a tsunami, shattering the ropes that bound him. Gasping for breath, Zhang Honglai crawled out of the pot and lay on the cold, damp, muddy ground of the basement. Zhang Jintian, who had already left, turned around. His gloomy face revealed a hint of satisfaction. There's still 2 months until the end of term exam. In these 2 months, the family's resources are at your disposal. If you can reach the 9th level of Qi refinement in 2 months, I will personally kidnap Qiao Shima and give her to you. Li Daochong, you can directly kill him during the end of term exam. If you can't reach the 9th level of Qi refinement, you don't have to go to school. I will arrange for you to take over the family's business on Black Sandstar in the 8th Ring Starfield. Chapter 52. When Zhang Honglai was slapped twice and taken away by Zhang Jintian, the guests in the banquet hall were surprised. This conflict became the best drama of the year. Li Daochong, who should have been crushed and humiliated, was unscathed. Zhang Honglai, who had the absolute upper hand, suffered a double loss and lost face. "Brotherly, Sino told me everything, thank." Ding Bang didn't care about Li Daochong's departure. He turned to thank Li Daochong with a smile, but he was interrupted halfway by Li Daochong. "We both took what we needed. Don't mention it again." Li Daochong knew what Ding Bang wanted to say. With so many people watching, he didn't want everyone to know about it. After all, Li Daochong relied on the hot-blooded upgrader. This was a big secret that absolutely couldn't be known by anyone. Ding Bang smiled and didn't care. Li Daochong's words were very clear. That day, he didn't save the dying and heal the injured. They didn't know each other anything. Ding Bang guessed that Li Daochong's master didn't like to be ostentatious. This kind of master was probably more arrogant and didn't like to be too close to people. Most of the time, he taught his disciple in this way, which led to Li Daochong not showing off. Brother Li is right. I'm being unreasonable. I don't know if I can leave a message. I really want to make friends with you. Ding Bang stretched out his wrist to express his goodwill. Li Daochong saw that Ding Bang was a sentimental person. He stretched out his wristwatch and glanced at Ding Bang's watch. Brethren, you and Daochong used to know each other? Xiao Shima saw that Ding Bang and Li Daochong were talking in a concise and comprehensive way that people couldn't understand, so she asked with some surprise. I don't know him. Li Daochong didn't care how Ding Bang was going to answer. Yeah, I don't know him. Ding Bang smiled and echoed. Xiao Shima frowned. Li Daochong was too impolite. She was clearly asking about Ping Dong Bang. Why did he interrupt? How many times had he told him not to spout nonsense before coming here? If he didn't know what to say, then don't say it. This guy was hopeless. Xiao Shima sighed in her heart. Ding Bang still wanted to have more exchanges with Li Daochong, but someone called him at this time, so he had no choice but to entertain them. Li Daochong, didn't I tell you not to talk nonsense and find a place to stay? Why didn't you listen to me? Also, it's just a transaction between us. Don't you know that? Why did you have to toast me and thank me for marrying you? Xiao Shima was angry. As soon as Ding Bang left, she pulled Li Daochong aside and questioned him. Didn't you say a few days ago that someone from the Li family was watching you and asked me to perform more? Li Daochong asked innocently. You did perform well, but don't you know how capable you are? Didn't you make a fool of yourself just now? You made a fool of yourself just by touching a cup. It's better not to perform. The more Xiao Shima spoke, the angrier she became. Got it. I'll pay attention. Li Daochong saw that Xiao Shima's face was red with anger and didn't want to argue or explain anything. As for the matter of Zhan Honglai giving her the puppet elixir, Li Daochong acted a deal with Zhan Honglai. Secondly, this marriage must go through. Li Daochong didn't want the Li family to ask for the betrothal gift back. Li Daochong originally agreed to Xiao Shima's fake marriage for money. At that time, it was indeed difficult. But now, Li Daochong didn't just want money. The family was so heartless. Li Daochong naturally didn't want them to be comfortable. Li Daochong would rather the Xiao family receive the betrothal gift than the Li family receive any benefits. Li Daochong didn't like to explain too much. Even if Xiao Shima complained, he didn't care. Xiao Shima saw that Li Daochong's attitude was good, so she didn't say anything more. She turned and went to the bathroom. She couldn't get rid of the wine stains on her body. She needed a change. Li Daochong returned to the corner and sat down. He picked up a plate of food and quietly waited for the banquet to end. He was becoming more and more disliked these kinds of occasions. Thank you for just now. Li Daochong had just sat down when Huo Shaoling walked out of the crowd and said apologetically, Thank you for just now. Thank me? Li Daochong, who was eating, asked with puffed-up cheeks. Of course. If it wasn't for you just now, I would have suffered internal injuries. Zhan Honglai used a hidden force when he knocked me down. Huo Shaoling looked sincere. She had just recovered and couldn't even speak after being knocked down. If Li Daochong hadn't supported her and acted as a cushion, she was afraid that she would have been seriously injured. If that had happened, Huo Shaoling wouldn't have been able to do anything to Zhan Honglai. The Zhan family was more powerful than the Huo family. You're talking about that. No need to thank me. I was just knocked down by you and acted as a cushion. You don't have to take it to heart. Li Daochong waved his hand. Coincidence? Huo Shaoling blinked and said with a strange look on her face, But when you supported me, I clearly felt a wave of qi enter my body and neutralize Zhan Honglia's hidden force. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have simply fallen down on you. When I was knocked down, I felt like my bones were about to break. Li Daochong, were you hiding your strength? I heard that your spirit meridians have dried up and you can't cultivate. Are you a cripple? How could you say that in front of others? You're the cripple. Your whole family is crippled. Li Daochong cursed in his heart. However, Li Daochong now had a rough idea of Huo Shaoling's personality. This woman was straightforward and didn't think before she spoke, but she wasn't a bad person. Miss Huo, I think you must be hallucinating. If you really want to thank me, don't disturb me while I eat. Thank you, Li Daochong said, not wanting to continue the conversation. All right, Huo Shaoling could only agree when she saw that Li Daochong didn't want to say more. She turned around, and took 2 steps before turning back to look at Li Daochong. With a sly look on her face, she said, "Li Daochong, you're not a cripple, are you?" Li Daochong pretended not to hear her and quickly finished the food in his hand. After leaving, Hua Xiaoling's face was filled with excitement, as if she had found her life goal. She raised her small fist and waved it in the air. Looking at the watch on her wrist, she muttered to herself, "Li Daochong, I didn't know you were so powerful. Just now, my watch showed that your cultivation was in the 8th layer of qi refining. Zhan Honglai is only in the 7th layer of qi refining. The reason why our Hua clan has been able to stand tall in Tianyuan City for hundreds of years is because of the production of magic treasures. This watch of mine has the ability to detect cultivation levels, and its accuracy is 100%. Ha ha ha." Hua Xiaoling was so pleased with herself that she laughed out loud. The guests near her looked at her as if she was an idiot. When the 2 girls who happened to be looking for her saw Hua Xiaoling's crazy appearance, they immediately pretended not to know her and turned around to leave. Li Daochong, who didn't know that he had been exposed, finally calmed down. After eating 5 plates of yan lu mei, Li Daochong, who had always had a bottomless stomach, felt a little full. Except for the conflict tonight, Li Daochong had been eating almost all the time. The following time was quite difficult for Li Daochong. After an hour, the birthday party was finally over. During this period, Shinhua took the initiative to invite Li Daochong to dance, but was flatly refused. After the party, the guests left one after another. As Shinua's friend, Qiao Shima helped to sort out the gifts and left a little later. Li Daochong had promised Shinhua that he would see her after the party, so he found an excuse to part with Qiao Shima and returned. The Yin family didn't have any real estate in Blue Bay Star, so Shinhua had been living in Piercing Cloud Hotel in Piercing Cloud Building during her stay in Blue Bay Star. In Supreme Suite number 8888, Shinhua spat out a mouthful of turbid blood, and the spiritual energy in his body suddenly became very smooth. The feeling of chest tightness and shortness of breath disappeared, and he could clearly feel that his mental power had increased a little. Chapter 53. Li Daochong didn't think much of Dingbang's praises. After all, he wasn't a pharmacist, and he wasn't even close to being a divine doctor. Dingbang's symptoms were the same as Ammonian's. There was a black wraith binding spirit hidden in his body. The difference was that Dingbang's mental force was so strong that the black wraith binding spirit couldn't absorb his life force without restraint. Instead, it was constantly suppressed. Therefore, Dingbang's condition wasn't as bad as Ammonian's. Li Daochong was just a little puzzled. Why were both father and son possessed by this black wraith binding spirit at the same time? Like Blue Bay Star, Planet Crimson Sun was in the 4th ring of the Federation. It was far from the Hades, so there shouldn't be any dark ghosts. Just now, Shinhua had said that there were 7 or 8 people in the Yin family with the same symptoms. It was very strange that so many people were possessed by the black wraith binding spirit. Could it be that a ghost mother had appeared on Planet Crimson Sun? Li Daochong couldn't help but think of this possibility. Otherwise, why would so many black wraith binding spirits appear all of a sudden? It really didn't make sense. If that was really the case, then something big would happen on Planet Crimson Sun soon. Li Daochong had a bad feeling about this. However, this was all just a guess. Even if his guess was right, Li Daochong couldn't do anything about it. Even Jin Dan cultivators would have to run for their lives if they encountered a ghost mother. This wasn't something Li Daochong could worry about. If a ghost mother was really discovered, the Federation would arrange for the cultivator army to go to Planet Crimson Sun to clean it up. Li Daochong naturally wouldn't tell the siblings about his concerns. He couldn't tell them either. If they found out that they weren't sick but possessed by a black wraith binding spirit, their first question would be how Li Daochong got rid of the black wraith binding spirit. Unless it was yuanying. Li Daochong obviously didn't have yuanying. So how did Li Daochong do it? A qi condensation cultivator was able to detect the black resentment binding spirit that only yuanying cultivators could detect. Once this was known, Li Daochong would definitely be targeted by many forces. He would be in danger of being captured at any moment. If he was captured, He would either be tortured to get the secret out of him or be studied by various means. This time, Li Daochong received 100,000 Federation coins for the treatment fee, just like last time. This amount of money was not worth mentioning to the Yin family. And Shino wanted to give Li Daochong a big gift to express his gratitude, but Li Daochong declined. In the eyes of the Yin siblings, Li Daochong was a miracle-working doctor. The ancient medical skills had been lost tens of thousands of years ago. After curing in Dingbang, it was confirmed that Li Daochong was a personal disciple of a reclusive expert, and Dingbang estimated that Li Daochong's master was at least a Jindan stage alchemist, or even a Yuanying stage alchemist. To be able to have a relationship with a Yuanying stage alchemist was a dream for any family. Spirit sequencer, alchemist, and refiner were the three most brilliant professions in the cultivation civilization. Any one of them was respected by the entire cultivation society. However, what made Dingbang distressed was that no matter how he expressed his goodwill, Li Daochong's response was always lukewarm. "Mr. Li, why don't you rest here tonight? And Shino will personally send you back tomorrow morning." And Shino saw that Li Daochong was about to leave and hurriedly urged him to stay. "That's right, Mr. Li. It's not early now. Anyway, there are many rooms. It just so happens that I have a few bottles of good spirit wine here. My brother and sister would like to drink with Mr. Li to our heart's content," and Dingbang said. The siblings both changed their address to Mr. Li Daochong, an alchemist who knew ancient medical skills. Even if he was only at the refinement stage, was definitely worthy of being called Mr. "No, I will be reprimanded by my master if I don't go home at night." Previously, and Dingbang had asked who Li Daochong's master was, so he could use this as an excuse. It was indeed useful to bring up this imaginary expert. The Yin siblings immediately stopped asking him to stay, and Dingbang's face was full of regret, but there was nothing he could do. When Li Daochong left the piercing cloud building, it was already late at night. He ran all the way in the night and returned home. Yin Ping was sitting in the living room watching a variety show on the astral vision. Seeing that Li Daochong had returned, she went back to her room to sleep. Every time Li Daochong saw this girl doing what she thought was her duty without any complaints, he always felt warm in his heart. The existence of the silver bottle added a touch of humanity to this cruel world. Bang! A muffled sound came from the fifth zero-gravity room. Chu Qinyue's beautiful eyes were full of shock. Just now, she was almost hit by Li Daochong's punch. If she hadn't raised her cultivation to the 7th level of refinement stage in time, she would have made a fool of herself. As a special class lecturer of Xiansong University, Chu Qinyue was about to be hit by a brat who was still wet behind the ears in a battle. Today was the 27th day since Li Daochong entered the 5th zero-gravity room. Almost every day, he was growing at an astonishing speed. Chu Qinyue was still unable to lower her cultivation. She kept it at the 6th level of refinement stage. If she lowered it even a little bit, it would be hard for her to keep up with Li Daochong's pace. Under 7 different frequencies and 7 times the gravity, even Chu Qianyue, who was at the peak of the 6th level of refinement stage, was unable to withstand it. "Qianyue, this brat is very strong." Qian Changhai's exclamation came into Chu Qianyue's ears. For the past half a month, Qian Changhai had been watching everything in the 5th zero-gravity room through the astral vision screen. Li Daochong's performance aroused Qian Changhai's great interest. The last time a student caught Qian Changhai's attention was 10 years ago. At that time, Battlesword Augustine had just entered Xiansong University. "Qianyue, why didn't you hit his lower body just now? It's none of your business. Girl, don't be stubborn. You can't beat him at the 6th level of refinement stage. Raise your level to the 7th level of refinement stage. If you really got hit, as a lecturer, you won't be able to raise your head." "Shut up," Chu Qianyue said fiercely. Li Daochong naturally couldn't hear Qian Changhai's voice. Chu Qianyue was wearing a psychic wave headset and a mask, but her voice was very loud. "Teacher Chu, what do you mean by shut up? I didn't say anything." Li Daochong was confused. "Shut up," Chu Qianyue shouted coldly. In the change of gravity, her figure flashed and appeared behind Li Daochong in the next second. Bang, bang, bang. In the blink of an eye, the two of them exchanged more than 10 moves. Their figures kept changing, up and down, left and right, everywhere. Chu Qianhua didn't believe it. She still maintained the 6th level of refinement stage and adjusted the frequency to 8 times the gravity. Li Daochong didn't adapt to the sudden change. He was hit hard by 2 punches and fell heavily on the left wall. Chu Qianhua caught up with him and kicked him again. Li Daochong raised his hand to resist. The moment the direction of gravity changed, he kicked Chu Qianhua in the chest. This kick was very tricky. It was from the bottom to the top. Chu Qianhua was careless and was almost kicked. If it weren't for the help of the change of gravity, she would have been kicked away. Damn it, Chu Qianhua cursed. She was so angry that the spiritual aura around her burst out uncontrollably. Li Daochong wanted to kick again, but Chu Qianhua's speed suddenly increased. He was kicked in the face before he could see it clearly. With a bang, Li Daochong fell on the roof. Qianhua, you're too shameless. You actually raised your cultivation to the 9th level of refinement stage. Do you want to kill that guy? Qian Shanghai couldn't stand it anymore and shouted. Chu Qianhua didn't answer. She just looked at Li Daochong with a hint of excitement in her eyes. It was right to ask this guy to be her sparring partner. In that instant of eruption, just now, he had actually comprehended a trace of space force that he had never experienced before. Li Daochong struggled to get up. But the direction of gravity changed, and the 8 times the gravity added made it very difficult for him to withstand the heavy blow. Chu Qianhua turned off the gravity change, leaving only 8 times the gravity. Even so, Li Daochong still couldn't stand up. The blow just now made his qi and blood surged, making him dizzy and the spiritual aura in his body chaotic. Chapter 54. Chu Qianhua's words were like a sharp arrow that pierced Li Daochong. Li Daochong's weight was 80 kilograms, and under 8 times gravity, it was 640 kilograms, which was more than half a ton, and this was just the basic weight. He was also wearing a special material that was made of a weight-bearing robe. This fraudulent robe had no defensive or offensive power. It only had one function, which was to increase the weight. On the surface, the robe looked no different from ordinary clothes-fitting training clothes, but in its normal state, it weighed 50 kilograms. With 8 times gravity, it was 400 kilograms. Li Daochong's own weight plus the robe would be able to bear a weight of more than a ton. If it was in a steady state, Li Daochong, who had reached the 8th level of the refining qi stage, could also bear it. But with a ton of weight and fighting in the lawless space, it was a different matter. Chu Qianhua's weight was 200 kilograms, which was 4 times Li Daochong's weight, plus her own weight. In an environment with 8 times gravity, it was almost 2 tons. Li Daochong did not know how much energy was contained in that small body, but he had always been curious about Chu Qianhua's real strength. Being able to become a stunt instructor at Xiansong University in her 20s, she naturally had her own strong points. Li Daochong initially estimated that Chu Qianhua's cultivation level was at the late stage of the qi gathering. Xiansong University's lecturers were generally at the early stage of the qi gathering, and the more powerful ones could reach the middle stage of the qi gathering, such as Blizzard Ice. As the first lecturer, Chu Qianhua's strength must be above Blizzard Ice, so Li Daochong guessed that she was at the late stage of the qi gathering. However, after coming into contact with her, Li Daochong increasingly felt that he had underestimated Chu Qianhua. At least she was at the peak stage of the qi gathering. But now Li Daochong felt that Chu Qianhua was not at the qi gathering stage. She was most likely a building foundation stage cultivator. A real cultivator. The more powerful Chu Qianhua was, the more excited Li Daochong was, and the more he respected Chu Qianhua. But he never thought that she would say such words. Teacher Chu, you want me to admit that I am a waste? Li Daochong was kneeling on one knee, looking at the ground, expressionlessly asked. Aren't you? I suppressed my strength to the 6th layer of the qi refining realm, and you couldn't even touch the corner of my clothes. If you aren't a piece of trash, then what are you? Chu Qinyue's face was cold and emotionless. Teacher Chu, have you always thought of me as a student like this? Li Daochong slowly raised his head. There was an indescribable sadness in his eyes. He didn't care if other people said this, but when it came from Chu Qinyue, Li Daochong couldn't accept it. Because these days, he had already regarded Chu Qinyue as his teacher. Since childhood, no teacher had ever taught him personally. Chu Qinyue was the first. No matter what her purpose was, Li Daochong was very grateful to her. He respected her and regarded her as his teacher. A trace of emotion flashed through Chu Qinyue's eyes. She didn't think that Li Daochong would ask such a question. She only had one purpose for saying such words, which was to provoke Li Daochong, to anger him, so that he would unreservedly display all his potential. Chu Qinyue didn't think much about other things, but when Li Daochong asked such a question, she felt the disappointment in his eyes. For a moment, she was unexpectedly speechless. Chu Qinyue had actually regarded Li Daochong as her student for a long time, but she was a person who didn't like to show her emotions and thoughts. In the words of Qian Changhai, she would rather suffer than lose face. The more she admired someone, the more Chu Qinyue would attack them. Battlesword Augustine was called dog shit by Chu Qinyue in the past. It was a piece of dog shit that was despised by people, stepped on, and cursed in the streets. Chu Qinyue only called Li Daochong trash after nearly a month, which was already giving him a lot of face. In the beginning, Chu Qinyue looked for Li Daochong for her own sake. If she hadn't accidentally discovered Li Daochong's strange spatial perception, Chu Qinyue wouldn't have had any interaction with this kind of poor student. But after these days of contact, Chu Qinyue was infected by Li Daochong's tenacity and unyielding spirit. Li Daochong's performance was completely different from what was recorded in the school's archives and what was rumored in the outside world. In less than a month, Li Daochong grew at an astonishing speed. Even the heaven-shaking battle sword Augustine couldn't compare to him. In terms of talent, Li Daochong definitely couldn't compare to battle sword Augustine. In terms of foundation, they were simply not on the same level. In terms of resources, Li Daochong couldn't even afford the enhanced healing elixir and still needed Chu Qinyue to provide it. When he was training battle sword Augustine, he paid Chu Qinyue 30,000 yuan a day as training fee, 30 spirit stones, and 50 liters of elixir for various purposes. Now, Chu Qinyue had to pay for everything herself, and she also had to pay Li Daochong's training fee. There was no harm without comparison. But it was this kind of cripple in the eyes of others that survived the special training in the Despair Room. Zero Gravity Room Number 5, which no longer existed 10 years ago, was Chu Qinyue's private training room, which was personally remodeled by Qian Changhai and named Despair. After it was built, no one except Chu Qinyue could withstand it for more than 10 days without any foundation, including Augustine. Li Daochong was the second. A guy with no talent, foundation, or resources survived it with only his strong willpower. Chu Qinyue once doubted whether this guy was human or not. In Li Daochong, Chu Qinyue saw her own shadow. Chu Qinyue valued Li Daochong beyond the scope of appreciation. She even wanted to teach him the heaven-level inferior grade cultivation method, Great Void swordsmanship, which she would never teach to outsiders. Girl, look at you. You've hurt that guy's heart. Quickly apologize to him. Don't drive away such a good seedling just because of a word. Qian Changhai's voice came out of the psychic wave earpiece. Chu Qinyue wiped the psychic wave earpiece with her hand and crushed it into pieces. If you want me to see you in a different light, then prove it to me. Chu Qinyue's tone was still cold. I will prove it, but I want to know whether I'm your student or not. Li Daochong asked with a certain look on his face. The Despair training room fell silent. Chu Qinyue's pair of beautiful eyes stared at Li Daochong, who had stood up not far away, and her lips hidden under the mask pursed. On the other side, Qian Changhai nervously looked at the astral vision screen, and his wrinkled hands subconsciously clenched into fists. Yes. A few seconds later, Chu Qinyue indifferently said a word. Hee hee, wicked girl. It's not easy for you to speak the truth. It seems that you really like this guy." Qian Changhai smiled meaningfully and said to himself. Li Daochong also smiled, and his smile was very bright. "Teacher Chu, be careful. I'm going to do it for real." "Nonsense, stop talking. Come on." Chu Qianyue frowned and said impatiently. "Okay." Li Daochong responded and moved. Almost at the same time, Chu Qianyue started to change gravity. The two figures kept swaying up and down in the chaotic space. Li Daochong compressed the 8 spiritual veins in his body at the same time, and his mind power gathered into a barrier. With a boom, the moment the gravity changed, Li Daochong fiercely stepped on the ground and shot out like an arrow. Chu Qianyue's beautiful eyes narrowed. So fast. Even though Li Daochong's speed was amazing, he was still not faster than the direction of gravity that changed 8 times in 1 second. But this time, Li Daochong's body was straight, and he was completely unaffected by the gravity coming from all directions. Pa Qian Changhai suddenly stood up from the chair with his pair of old eyes, and his hands heavily slammed on the table as he cried out involuntarily. "How is this possible?" Chu Qianyue's shock was far stronger than Qian Changhai's. Flying spirit steps? This guy actually comprehended a movement that could only be comprehended in the Qi gathering stage. If you want to fly on a sword, you must first learn the flying spirit steps. When you reach the Qi gathering stage, you will naturally be able to use it after a little learning, but it is extremely difficult to achieve in the Qi refining stage. It was almost similar to the lightness skill, which could resist the gravity for a short period of time and make yourself as light as a swallow to fly more than 10 meters away. The more powerful ones could fly dozens of meters away. Chu Qianyue didn't have time to think. She suppressed her cultivation to the Qi refining stage, so she couldn't resist the gravity at all. In an instant, her spiritual energy surged, and she reached the Qi gathering stage in one fell swoop. But it was still too late. Li Daochong had already rushed to the front of Chu Qianyue, and he quickly punched her. Bang! Chapter 55, June 16th. At the foot of Tianyuan Mountain, Spirit Lake Villa, Li Daochong and Xiao Shima wore the traditional wedding attire of the Shenghua Federation and stood at the entrance of the villa to welcome the guests. However, very few people came to congratulate them. The Qiao family was just a small family and didn't have much prestige in Tianyuan City. 1,000 invitations were sent out, but less than 1/50th of them actually showed up. However, the Qiao family had expected this. This wedding banquet was just for show. The invitations were sent out for publicity, not for a treat. Li Daochong was happy to see that not many people came. He quickly ended this formalistic wedding banquet so that he could go home and sleep. The end of the semester exam was approaching. Li Daochong wasn't interested in anything other than cultivation. Spirit Lake Villa was the most popular wedding venue in Tianyuan City. It was surrounded by mountains and lakes and was surrounded by fog all year round. It was like a fairyland. Li Daochong and Xiao Shima stood at the entrance of the villa that was specially set up to welcome guests. Just by looking at their appearance, they were a match made in heaven. Although Xiao Shima was tall and slender, with a height of 1.7 meters, Li Daochong was not short either, with a height of 1.85 meters. However, in the eyes of others, Li Daochong was just an idiot. They couldn't help but feel that Xiao Shima wasn't worth it. The Qiao family didn't treat Li Daochong well from morning until night. Of course, it wasn't just the Qiao family. Xiao Shima's friends and classmates also ignored Li Daochong. Among the classmates who were invited, only Ouyang Qian was polite to Li Daochong. Xiao Shima was quite helpless about this. She couldn't tell anyone about the fake marriage. Today, Li Daochong had suffered a lot of supercilious looks. She felt very sorry. At first, Xiao Shima was worried that Li Daochong wouldn't be able to bear it and would explode. However, after a day of peace, Li Daochong remained silent. Li Daochong, I'm sorry. Don't take what they said to heart. I didn't expect them to say that to your face. I'll make it up to you. Xiao Shima gathered her courage and whispered when no one was around. She was worried that Li Daocheng wouldn't be able to hold on. Li Daocheng's behavior at Insinuo's birthday party had left her with a lingering fear. There's nothing to be sorry about. What they said is also the truth. My current situation is indeed not good enough for you. You don't have to worry. I know what I'm doing and won't have a conflict with your family and friends. You can be at ease as your fake bride, and I'll pretend to be deaf and dumb as my fake groom. Let's go through the process. Xiao Shima hadn't expected Li Daocheng to say that. Suddenly, the tension in her heart eased a lot, and she even felt a sense of security. In a trance, Xiao Shima realized that she didn't understand Li Daocheng at all. Ever since he proposed the condition of the fake marriage, he seemed to have changed. Although he was still silly sometimes, Xiao Shima couldn't see through him most of the time. Thank you for thinking that way. Xiao Shima looked at Li Daocheng and said sincerely. Then she asked, do you really not mind what they said about you? Everyone kicks a man when he's down. This has been the way of the world since ancient times. You'll get used to it. I'm immune. Li Daocheng shrugged with a smile. Xiao Shima looked at the calm Li Daocheng in astonishment. She hadn't expected him to be able to say such reasonable words. Moreover, from beginning to end, his eyes didn't have a trace of impurity, as clear as a pool of jade spring. Was this still the foolish young master who had been abandoned by his family? She couldn't tell. Do you hate me for using you like this? Xiao Shima asked again. No. Li Daocheng was straightforward. Are you sure? Xiao Shima asked in disbelief. Of course. I don't want to leave family to take back the betrothal gifts. Our goal is the same. I'm also using you. Why would I hate you? Li Daocheng replied straightforwardly. The astonishment in Xiao Shima's eyes deepened. How could she have thought that he was a fool when he spoke with such clear logic? All right, don't think too much. Someone's coming, Li Daocheng said in a low voice. Xiao Shima, who was in a daze, came back to her senses. She saw a few friends coming down from the floating car. They were all Xiao Shima's good friends. Sidu Lan, Ouyang Qian, Lu Mei, and Lu Ming came together. Along the way, the four of them talked about the marriage between Xiao Shima and Li Daocheng. Aside from Ouyang Qian, the other three thought this beauty must have taken the wrong medicine to marry Li Daocheng. When the four of them arrived, they all congratulated Xiao Shima. Only Ouyang Qian congratulated Li Daocheng. The other three didn't even bother to put on a show. Sidu Lan felt indignant for her good friend. At this time, when she saw Li Daocheng leaning on the doorframe without the slightest intention of welcoming the guests, she suddenly felt angry in her heart. It was obviously the big day of the wedding, yet he still looked listless. Xiao Shima, such a great beauty. Married to you, what else do you want? Hey, Shima, why did you marry such a sickly guy? His face is as pale as paper. Is there something wrong with his body? Can't you stand after standing for a while? Don't you know etiquette? Sidu Lan frowned. She didn't hide her voice, so everyone present could hear her. Sidu Lan and Xiao Shima had known each other since they were young. The two of them were inseparable in high school. They were absolutely close friends. Sidu Lan naturally felt indignant that her good friend was marrying such a person. When Xiao Shima heard Situ Lan's words, her relaxed mood suddenly rose to her throat. Just as she was about to speak, she was interrupted by Lu Mei. That's right. You look like a drug addict. Li Daocheng, did you hear Sister Lan's words? Don't lean against the door. Show some respect. Shima marrying you is a blessing from your past life. Lu Mei, who was next to her, interjected. Adding fuel to the fire was her specialty. Sidu Lan was a top student of the elite class. Lu Mei would never let go of any opportunity to curry favor with her. Li Daocheng, are you deaf? I told you to stand properly. Sidu Lan couldn't stand Li Daocheng's lack of care for Xiao Shima. On the day of the wedding, he still looked like he was about to die. One could imagine how he usually acted. You can't even stand by the bride's side. If Shima is bullied in the future, I'm afraid you'll run faster than anyone else. Lu may continue to help. As the number 3 of the elite class, Lu Ming stood to the side without saying anything. He looked at Li Daocheng with a smile. He wanted to see how this rumored fool would deal with the two girls scolding in front of everyone. Among the four of them, Ouyang Qian was the only one who wanted to speak up for Li Daocheng. However, she couldn't afford to offend the other three, so she kept her mouth shut. Li Daocheng didn't expect that his unintentional action would cause the two girls to curse at him. His indifferent expression revealed a trace of displeasure. Just as he was about to speak, Xiao Shima grabbed his hand tightly. Li Daocheng curled his lips and didn't say anything. Xiao Shima felt that she should speak up at this time. Sister Lan, may today, Tiske, Xiao Shima, I didn't think you would actually marry this fool in the end. Whether it's true or not, it's really a waste of your appearance. However, if you change your mind and marry me, you don't have to return the betrothal gift. Do you want to reconsider? Li Xiandong shook his head and said regretfully. Xiao Shima had just opened her mouth to speak when she was interrupted. The Li family's imposing manner was like a rainbow. More than 10 people had arrived. They were all young people of Li Daocheng's generation. Almost all of them were from the branch family. Only Li Xiandong, who had spoken, was the grandson of the Li family's third elder. He belonged to the direct line of descent. More than 10 people clustered around Li Xiandong. Aside from their clothes, they looked like a group of subordinates following their boss to the entrance of the villa. Everyone was afraid of getting into trouble, so they all moved away. When the arrogant Liu Mei saw the Li family's arrival, she was so scared that she hurriedly hid behind Sita Lan and Lu Ming. Although Sita Lan and Lu Ming weren't descendants of large families, they were both students of Xiansong University's superclass. With this identity, even the four great families wouldn't easily provoke them. Of course, they were even more unwilling to provoke the Li family. Sita Lan and Lu Ming looked at each other and stood to the side without speaking. When Li Xiandong walked over, he didn't even look at Li Daocheng. His eyes stared unabashedly at Xiao Shima's chest. The group of Li family members behind him all had sinister smiles on their faces. They didn't come with good intentions. Li Xiandong, please mind your words. If you're here to congratulate us, then the Qiao family welcomes you. If you're here to cause trouble, then I'll have no choice but to call the police, Xiao Shima said with a cold face. Li Xiandong's expression changed. He coldly snorted, Humph, Xiao Shima. Everyone knows why you married that fool. Don't pretend to be pure in front of me. In order to not return the betrothal gifts, you even married a fool. Are all the women of the Qiao family so cheap? You. Xiao Shima was so angry that she couldn't speak. Her face alternated between red and white, and tears kept welling up in her eyes. What about me? What good does it do you to marry this fool? I'll scold you in front of him. Let's see if he dares to make a sound. Believe it or not, this fool definitely won't have any reaction if I touch you. Li Xiandong reached out his hand towards Xiao Shima's chest. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. Li Xiandong's entire body flew out and landed a dozen meters away. He almost couldn't breathe and fainted. You can scram now, Li Daocheng, who had been leaning against the door, said coldly. At the entrance of Spirit Lake Villa, in an instant, there was a deathly silence. Chapter 56. After Li Daocheng's cold voice rang out, the entrance to Spirit Lake Villa fell into a deathly silence. Everyone turned to look at Li Daocheng. No one had expected that the person who was least likely to make a move would actually attack Li Xiandong. They were all dumbstruck. Xiao Shima stared blankly at Li Daocheng, who stood up for her, her small mouth slightly agape. When the Li family members walked over, everyone moved aside. Even the Qiao family members avoided them. She thought she would be humiliated in public. She didn't expect that the person who shouldn't have made a move would make a move. Li Xiandong was a cultivator at the 5th level of Qi refining, ranked in the middle of Xiansong University's elite class. How could Li Daocheng send him flying? The moment Li Xiandong was hit, he felt as if he was on the verge of death. When he was sent flying, he thought he would be killed. A talisman paper slowly fell from the sky. Only then did everyone come back to their senses. That strong light, just now, was some kind of attack talisman card Li Daocheng had used. To be able to send Li Xiandong flying, it had to be at least a strengthened 2nd-level talisman card. When everyone realized that Li Daocheng had used a talisman card, The shock on their faces turned into realization. The Li family members were the first to come to their senses. Li Bing, as the second most important person in the Li family, immediately said, "Li Daochong, you've got guts. You actually dared to sneak attack third brother in public. Take him back and punish him according to the family rules." At his command, a dozen or so Li family members immediately rushed to capture Li Daochong. Xiao Shima's beautiful face turned pale with fright. She didn't know what to do. "Whoever wants to taste my ice talisman, feel free to come." Li Daochong stretched out his hand, and 3 talisman cards appeared in his hand. They were all second-level talisman cards that he had made himself. The dozen or so Li family members were stunned. They all stopped in their tracks, not daring to move forward. Even Li Daochong was sent flying. The power of Li Daochong's talisman cards was clearly not something a mob like them could contend against. "Li Daochong, you want to rebel?" As a member of the Li family, attacking a member of your own family in public is against the rules of the family. "Do you want to become enemies with the family?" Li Bing asked sternly. As soon as he said this, the surrounding people looked at Li Daochong with sympathy. This brat had long been marginalized by the Li family. Now that he had a conflict with a member of the family in front of everyone, it was likely that he would completely fall out with the family. "Li Bing, you're lying through your teeth. Aren't you afraid of being struck by lightning? Today is my big day, and you're flirting with my wife in front of everyone." "It's fine if you're just moving your lips, but Li Xiandong, that bastard, wants to molest her in public. If I stop him, I'll be rebelling? Was that a violation of the clan's rules? May I ask which of the Li family's rules states that protecting one's wife is against the rules?" Li Daochong spoke slowly as he toyed with the 3 ice talismans in his hand. The threat was obvious. His actions were clearly warning the members of the Li family that whoever dared to rush forward would be the first to taste the ice talismans. Lu Ming watched the whole thing with a strange look in his eyes. He really hadn't thought that Li Daochong would have such guts. Li Daochong had finally recovered, and he looked at Li Daochong with hatred. He didn't dare to rush forward again. That attack, just now, wasn't something he could withstand. He hadn't expected Li Daochong to have so many attack talisman cards on him. "Li Daochong, you have to pay attention to evidence when you speak. What did I molest your wife? Who saw it?" Li Xiandong's expression changed. Although he had reached out with his hand, he hadn't touched Xiao Shima. "I saw it." A deep male voice came from his side. Li Tianyang sat in his wheelchair, his face gloomy as he slowly walked in. When Li Xiandong and Li Bing saw Li Tianyang, their faces stiffened. Even though Li Tianyang had been abandoned by the Li family, he was still the head of the Li family. To them, he was an elder. Even though Li Tianyang's cultivation had dropped so much that it was rumored that he hadn't even reached the 6th level of qi refining, he was still a great cultivator of Jindan. A starving camel was still bigger than a horse. Li Xiandong and Li Bing didn't dare to confront Li Tianyang directly. A Jindan cultivator was seriously injured, and he wasn't someone they, who were still at the bottom of qi refining, could deal with. "Second uncle." Li Xiandong hurriedly greeted him, and the other members of the Li family hurriedly followed suit. "Do you still see me as your second uncle?" Li Tianyang sneered. "Second uncle? Look at what you're saying. You'll always be my second uncle." Li Xiandong replied with a fake smile. Then why did you speak so rudely to my daughter-in-law on my son's wedding day? Are those words even human?" Li Tianyang coldly snorted, his face darkening. "Second uncle, you're being biased. Your nephew's words may not have been pleasant to hear, but Li Daochong didn't care about his own family and hit me in front of everyone. Is that something a human would do?" Li Xiandong's eyes turned as he tried to defend himself. "I also saw you touch the bride first." Suddenly, a cynical voice was heard. Sidalon looked at Lu Ming in surprise. She didn't know what was wrong with him to suddenly speak up for Li Daochong. Li Xiandong's eyes narrowed as he looked at Lu Ming. "Friend, it's best to think before you speak. Don't speak carelessly." The consequences of speaking the wrong words are sometimes unbearable. I know who you are. The Lu family has been developing well these past few years. You can't be thinking of increasing the difficulty, right? Li Xiandong's words had a hidden meaning. Anyone with a discerning eye could understand that he was threatening Lu Ming, telling him not to meddle in other people's business. Otherwise, he would be making an enemy of the Li family, and he would have to bear the consequences. Lu Ming smiled and said, "Only when there's difficulty will there be challenges. There's no such thing as smooth sailing. I also know you, Li Xiandong. You're from the elite class, right? It's best if you stay away from me during the end-of-term exam." Li Xiandong's face was ashen, but in his heart, he wanted to retreat. He couldn't be clearer about Lu Ming's strength. In the elite class, aside from the two freaks, the next in line was this seemingly harmless Lu Ming. The Lu family had always been relatively mysterious in Tianyuan City. The family's strength didn't seem strong, but in all these years, no family had dared to provoke them, including the four great families of the Blue Bay Star. The Lu family's main business structure wasn't in the Blue Bay Star. One Li Tianyang was already enough for Li Xiandong to deal with. With another Lu Ming, Li Xiandong, as the weakest direct descendant of the Li family, had no power to resist at all. "Lu Ming, remember this. My third brother, Li Tianyao, has always been interested in you." "Oh, right. You probably haven't seen him before. He's been studying at the Quicksand Academy on the Yellow Rock Star of the 5 Ring Star region. He'll be back in a few days and will directly enter the elite class. The end-of-term exam in a month will definitely be very interesting." Li Xiandong was unwilling to be outdone. The name Li Tianyao didn't mean much to others. The strongest member of the Li family's younger generation had always been Li Heming. However, Li Heming was already in his 4th year and was about to graduate. He was at the early stage of the qi condensation. After Li Tianyang, Li Heming was the most talented member of the Li family. However, this guy didn't seem to be very interested in cultivation. He was enthralled with spiritual machinery engineering and wholeheartedly wanted to create powerful steel puppets to deal with the dark ghosts. Others didn't know about Li Tianyao, but when Li Daochong heard the name, a ripple appeared on his face, which had always been as calm as an ancient well. 3 years ago, Li Tianyao had broken Li Daochong's leg because Li Daochong didn't give way to him. At the time, Li Tianyang was still the head of the family. But because Li Tianyao was the son of the second elder, he was of the same generation as Li Tianyang. He was Li Daochong's uncle, and the two of them were about the same age. In addition, Li Tianyao's talent was outstanding. 3 years ago, he had awakened his spirit vein and begun to cultivate to the 2nd level of qi condensation. Li Tianyang couldn't get justice for his son, so the matter was left unsettled. "Li Daochong, you can give up on the end-of-term examination. Otherwise, you won't be able to keep your leg. Let's go." Li Xiandong didn't forget to add one more sentence to Li Daochong. Throwing his head back and laughing, he led the Li family away. Once the Li family left, the atmosphere somewhat relaxed. Because of Li Daochong's performance, Sita Lan's previous grudge against him disappeared. She took the initiative to thank Li Daochong for her good friend. Lume was also thick-skinned. She acted as if she hadn't said anything and praised Li Daochong for being very manly. After the farce ended, no one else came. The Qiao family began the wedding ceremony according to procedure. In less than an hour, the ceremony was hastily wrapped up. The two newlyweds sat in a floating wedding car and left. "Li Daochong, will your family deal with you?" Xiao Shima asked worriedly as they sat in the floating wedding car. "That's my business. You don't have to worry. Before the end-of-term examination, I hope to complete the divorce procedures," Li Daochong calmly replied. Hearing Li Daochong's words, Xiao Shima silently nodded. She didn't know why, but she felt a bit strange. Who knew how many men were dying to marry her? This guy actually wanted to divorce her on the day of their wedding. Even if it was fake, he didn't need to be so impatient. The Qiao family had already prepared the wedding house. It was located in a middle-class district in the eastern district of Tianyuan City called Jade Sea Cave. It had its own gate and courtyard, so it was quite quiet. According to the agreement, Li Daochong and Xiao Shima had to live together for a month after the wedding. This was very important. If they lived separately right after the wedding, it would be hard not to raise suspicions. Entering the wedding house, the two were a bit embarrassed. "Daochong, there's only one bedroom. Xiao Shimal whispered, her face slightly red. Oh, you sleep in the bedroom. I'll sleep in the room over there. Li Daochong didn't mind and pointed to the room furthest from the bedroom. It was just a fake marriage, so they definitely couldn't share a room. Sleeping separately was exactly what he wanted. Speaking of sleeping separately, Li Daochong's face revealed a happy expression. Xiao Shima felt a bit disappointed. This guy actually chose the room furthest from the bedroom. His expression seemed to say that the farther, the better. Xiao Shima, who was used to being sought after, felt very uncomfortable being ignored. That's the storage room. Do you want to sleep in the study? Xiao Shima kindly reminded. No need. The study is too close to the bedroom. The storage room is better. We won't disturb each other. It's pretty good. Li Daochong flatly refused and walked into the storage room. Xiao Shima, who was completely ignored, stared blankly at Li Daochong's back. Her face revealed anger. She should be the one to say those words. Why did it seem like she wanted to get close to him? Bang! The heavy sound of the door closing. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.